Good afternoon, everyone. Hey, hello. So, is this only for hello? Hello? You should just hear me, right? Hello? Hello? Let's turn it on. Hello? Yeah. Hello? Oh, may cover the scene. There are few Yep. Hello? Can I be heard? Yeah, I should just freeze this and then I'll be heard. Speak a bit louder. Ah, okay. Okay. Yep. Hello? Yep. Hello, everyone. So we'll start the session for today. I hope to those tuned in online, you can hear me well. So I was asked to speak a bit louder, so for those in the room to be able to hear me. So our good friend Pavel told me that since I am wearing this tool, I'll be your Madonna for today, which means that I'll be moderating the discussion that we will have for this afternoon. So, good afternoon, everyone. Once again, welcome to today's conference. To those who are tuned in online, thank you for taking the time to listen to this dialogue. We wish you could join us the next time in person here in Olomouc. We are thrilled to have esteemed participants joining us, both online and in person. We are also very grateful for the panelists who are all, we are all excited to hear from. In a while, I will introduce each of the panelists. But before that, let me briefly introduce who I am. Why am I here? I am Joshua Angelo Bata, and again, I'll be your Madonna or moderator for today's discussions. It is my privilege to be with you, and I would like to express my sincerest gratitude to GLODEP Consortium for organizing this. For those of you who are really unfamiliar with me, I finished my GLODEP degree in 2021. I am currently working as an associate researcher for the Conventional Arms and Ammunition Program of the Geneva-based United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research. So we are an autonomous research institute within the United Nations focusing on arms control and global security challenges. In my portfolio, we attempt to understand how conventional arms control can contribute to conflict prevention, armed violence reduction, and peace building. I am based in the Philippines and serves as the focal point for our work in the region, and particularly in Asia Pacific, where we conduct research, advisory support, and capacity building on conventional weapons issues by understanding how arms control or weapons control and disarmament measures contribute to peace, security, and of course, development. So, without further delay, let us begin by framing the topic of this conference. As we reflect on the world around us, we see a wide array of overlapping and complex issues that presents itself as existential challenges. Despite decades of progress, ending extreme poverty everywhere by 2030 is out of reach, according to the World Bank. The UN Secretary General has stressed that the global economy is not working for everyone. The widespread, rapid, and intensifying climate change is bringing multiple different changes in various regions, posing many risks to human beings and all other forms of life on Earth. We see trust in institutions has been decreasing, not to mention the global democratic decline. And in the digital age, we see the explosion of disinformation and misinformation, threatening democratic integrity and sowing mistrust among societies and communities. We have indeed grown closer together. I mean, some people are online joining us from all Olamots, yet further apart. Armed conflict and armed violence is on the rise, a surge we have not seen since the post World War II era. The nuclear danger is still present, and the escalating weaponization of artificial intelligence has led to a new arms race. And so, what do these tell us? We are now experiencing a structural shift. The world we live in today is far more violent, far more fragmented, exacerbating many of the humanitarian and development challenge we are all familiar with. We see persistent and grave human rights violations in several regions. Many states are preparing to rearm themselves, while humanitarian needs are growing and expanding, and development space is shrinking as wealthy donors are pulling out their funding. As we enter a multipolar world, as we call it in my universe, we're prompted to ask ourselves a vital question. How can we contribute to building a world that is more peaceful and less divided? And even more importantly, what role can young people play in this journey? Our goal today is to explore these questions. The task is huge, but we also know we have no shortage of ideas and energy, as I see in this room, that we can turn into action. The GLODEP Consortium has brought together a diverse panel of young panelists who, despite coming from different corners of the world, share common values. They will help us explore these questions today and share with us some of their reflections. But before I introduce the members of our panel today and the preliminary questions that they will reflect on, I would first invite the GLODEP Consortium Local Director, Dr. Lenka Dushkova, to formally welcome us to this conference. Please, Professor.
Joshua, thank you very much. It was my great pleasure to see all of you here in the room, but also all of you that are hopefully having a chance to cross the digital divide and to be joining us online from all sorts of corners around the world. It is my pleasure once again to welcome you on behalf of the entire GLODEP consortium, which means the University, Palatsky University here in Olomouc, the University of Clermont-Auvergne in France, the University of Pavia in Italy, and also from on behalf of our many partners all across the globe, from Casablanca, from Bogota, from Johannesburg, from Bethlehem, and from Bishkek. For the past 7 years, GLODEP has been a vibrant space for knowledge exchange between young people with diverse backgrounds, but also coming from different parts of the world, and the dedicated professionals in the field of development. Together, we have strived to make our small, yet meaningful contribution towards a fairer and more peaceful world by fostering dialogue, cooperation, and learning. We, the GLODEP, are deeply proud of our alumni who after earning their diplomas went on to work in different development-related organizations, institutions, grassroots initiatives, and communities, carrying forward the spirit and the values nurtured within the program. Our connection to them, however, doesn't end with the graduation. We continue to be open to learn from them, bring their insights, their experiences, and inspiration back to the program through ongoing discussions, through their contributions to our classes, through growing the network of that is reaching far, far behind the classrooms. The GLODEP also aspires to serve as an open platform where knowledge travels, the voices from the various parts of the world are heard. Today, the panel is a nice example, nice reflection of that aspiration. It brings together not only our alumni, but also the other inspiring young people who are actively shaping our common future in their own ways, on the grassroots as well as on the policy level. And as we believe in power of exchange of ideas, that is why also we are trying to live stream the whole event to open up the reflections on development to a wider audience. So please listen critically, but with curiosity, engage wholeheartedly, and above all, let yourself to be inspired. Thank you very much, and I'm passing my word back to Joshua.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Lenka, for welcoming us to this conference. At this point, I would like to focus on the format of our dialogue and our panelists, who I'm sure each bring unique perspectives and expertise to the conversations that we will have today. These inspiring voices are actively contributing to international development, whether through their professional paths or through meaningful and everyday actions in their communities, as mentioned by Professor Lenka. I will invite our panelists to begin with a 10-minute reflection each. This will be followed by a short discussion and a dedicated time for question and answer with our audience, of course, both here in Olomouc and those online. You can send in your questions. I encourage everyone to make our discussion as engaging as possible as we confront similar challenges. Let us treat this as our dialogue for today's action and the future by young people for all people. Our speakers today will reflect on and address the following questions. How do you see your role as a young person in development? How do you want to contribute? Or how are you contributing to it? Why should young people engage in development? What is their added value in the current turbulent world? How does your organization or communities you deal with the current challenges? What are crucial pillars or values you see in development related work, which could also be based from your own experiences? How would you motivate other young people to engage in contributing to the development of more peaceful and less unequal societies? What approaches do you find useful? And where do you see the biggest sense to focus and why? Could you share as well an example of success that are often intangible in your own work? With these, allow me to introduce our speakers. First, let's welcome Linda Kechi Emmanuel. She is from Nigeria and connecting from Nigeria today. Linda is a development and humanitarian worker with expertise in peace building, conflict prevention resolution, gender and social inclusion, as well as social and economic empowerment. With several years of hands on experience working in grassroots communities, she is deeply committed to advocating the rights of women and youth and building sustainable communities. Her passion lies in creating positive change and fostering inclusive development. Please let's give a round of applause to Linda. Our second panelist is Monica Avogadri. Monica will also join us online. She is a GLODEP alumna and a project manager with field experience in humanitarian and development projects across Iraqi, Kurdistan, and Nepal. She worked with international NGOs on project management, implementation, and fundraising. Her work focuses on youth empowerment, migration, and emergency response. She currently manages a European transnational project supporting the socio-economic inclusion of Ukrainian refugees with disabilities. Please, let's give a round of applause for Monica. Next, we have on the room, please welcome Aruj Fatima, who is also a GLODEP alumna. Aruj is a young development leader from Pakistan, reimagining how we support parents, children, and communities to thrive. As a social and behavioral change program manager at White Rice, she leads national programs for UNICEF using behavioral science, storytelling, and design thinking to spark real change. Her mission is simple yet radical: bring powerful human centered ideas to the people who need them the most, with dignity, care, and community at the core. Please, let's give a applause to Aruj. Our fourth panelist is my dear friend and batchmate Jose Jeronimo Olvera Leo, or we call Jake, as we fondly call him. He is a Mexican economist and a GLODEP alumnus. At the World Bank, he has worked on employment impacts on climate change. At the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, he contributed to the Financing for Development reports. Currently, he supports tax and transfer reforms in Latin America at the World Bank. Please, let's give a round of applause to Jay. Lastly, let us welcome Pavel Havlicek. Pavel is Research Fellow at the Association for International Affairs, or AMO. His research focuses on Eastern Europe, especially Ukraine and Russia, and Eastern Partnership. He also deals with questions of security, disinformation, and strategic communications, as well as democratization and civil society support in the Central and Eastern Europe and post-Soviet space. Pavel is a graduate of a 2-year Erasmus Mundus International Master in Russian, Central, and Eastern European Studies at the University of Glasgow, and the EU Studies at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Poland. Please, let's welcome Pavel. I invite everyone to listen to each of our panelists, prepare questions as we go along, and we will address them later on. To those online, you may write down your questions in the comment section, and of course, to whom the question is addressed. For both online and in-person participants, please introduce yourself briefly before your question or comments. Together, let's uncover fresh perspectives and inspire action for a more just and connected world. Now, over to you, Linda. Linda, can you hear us?
I'm with you. Good afternoon. So my name is Linda Manuel. I have likely said I'm from Nigeria. Good afternoon once again to all present. It's a great honor to be here with you all today. I'm speaking to you from Nigeria, a country that is a country of incredible diversity, youth energy, and ongoing transformation. I'm deeply grateful to the organizers of this event for giving me this opportunity. to share my experience as well as for my voice to be heard, not just in my country, but also in other countries. Currently, I work with an international organization here in Nigeria, Mexico, where I work in to advance peace building, youth leadership, and gender inclusion in conflict-affected areas of the northern Nigeria. But then beyond my title, I am first and foremost a young African woman who believes in the power of young people to imagine and create the world that we live in. Thank you very much. I don't know if you continue or to hold on here. It's going to introduce us.
Yes, please continue, Linda. Thank you.
Okay, so diving into the discussion proper. So, as a young woman born and raised in Nigeria, a country full of potential yet often challenged by insecurity, inequality, and institutional gap, I've always seen development not just as a professional pursuit, but as a personal responsibility. For me, development is not just about grand plans, big projects, and the likes. It's about shifting the mindset of the people. It's about showing up every day to create a room for others to grow, especially those that have been pushed, those that have been sidelined, like the young women, the youth, the people even with disability, and the people living in rural communities, most especially the young people. My journey into development didn't begin with a job. It did not began with job title and the rest. It started with just me personally witnessing injustice. Growing up, I saw firsthand how insecurity, poverty, and exclusion, especially exclusion of women and youth, crippled people's potential. Over here in Nigeria, we have a whole lot of constraints that restrict people from fully achieving their potentials. But I also saw a community rise. I saw young people creating solutions with limited resources and support, leading peace walks, campaigns, and leading advocacies, and showing up for each other, even with the failed systems. That led me to work in the development space. That fire of exclusion and the rest led me to work in the development space that I am right now. Not just as a profession, because my work right now is more of a passion rather than a profession. But as a passion, as a commitment, I see my role as a bridge builder between communities and institutions, between policies and practices, and between fears and hopes. At the organization Mexico, where I work, I currently lead a program that supports peace structures. We go to communities, create new peace structures to build the capacity of the youth and give them opportunity so that their voices can be heard. We build these structures and even equip women with leadership skills and the tools they need to strive as women. I will create safe spaces for dialogues. Development for me is not about ticking the box. Yes, I do things like that. No. It's about amplifying the voices, shifting power, and building dignity. That's what development is. Sometimes people have to ask, why should young people be involved in development? A whole lot of questions are being asked. When you go to high-level meetings, they ask, why must we bring young people to this table? And my response is because the future is now. We are no more the leaders of tomorrow. We are the leaders of today. We are the dreamers of today. We are the doers of today. We as young people, we bring creativity, we bring resilience, we bring authenticity to the table. We bring our life experiences that enrich global solutions. In a world where conflict is all over, inequality, climate crisis, and the likes of it, young people are not the problem. We are not the problem as young people, but we are part of the solution. Most times we go for meetings together, the young people are the problem, but I am here to tell you, we are not the problem. I prefer to say young people are not the problem, but we are part of the solution. Key part of the solution, please. I've seen young people facilitate dialogue through my work. I have led processes in communities where young people facilitate dialogue, facilitate advocacy. I've seen young people rise beyond trauma and trauma of the violence they face and lead peace campaigns and lives in their communities. I've also seen teenage girls with their school raising awareness and campaigns on ending gender-based violence. These are not exceptions, they are the standard. And as a global community to invest in such activities, such initiatives for global results. Our value is not just our energy, it's our courage to question the status quo, as you believe to question the status quo, and our ability to rethink beyond convention, developing fresh eyes and bold hearts, and that's what the youth are bringing to the table. Through my work, I have come to believe that sustainable development must rest on a very few key pillars. Number one is inclusion. You need to include everybody. If you are having an initiative, any sustainable development must rest on all groups in the society. If the most vulnerable are not the center of our work, then we are only reinforcing inequality. Another pillar that I have pointed out, I'm going to point out, is local ownership. When we do work, we should not take the solution to the people. We should allow the people to give us their solution. Because we know, as we are different, so also the solutions we have in our head differs. The fact that solution works in community A doesn't make it necessary for it to work in the other community. So we have to let it locally own, allow the community bring out the solution that works for them. And another thing is peace and justice. True and sustainable development cannot happen without peace, and peace cannot be sustained without justice. So these values are not optional or theoretical, they are foundational for sustainable development in our communities. How we engage with our stakeholders and how we measure success, all these build up sustainable development. My country, Nigeria, like many other countries, face immense development challenges from violent extremism, insecurity, economic instability, climate shocks, and the rest. These challenges can be overwhelming, but they also demand innovation. So through the program I'm working on is the European Union funded program here in Northern Nigeria. So through this program, as our way of trying to curb the challenges in the country, we're able to create youth-led platforms for peace building, where the youth are the ones leading local dialogues, leading peace building initiatives in their community. Also, we're able to train community members on gender equality, trauma healing, and social inclusion. Because we noticed that because of the cultural, religious differences and beliefs, some people have some kind of belief that was not corresponding with our work. You go to a meeting and then you cannot find a woman in the meeting. You go to a meeting, you cannot find a young person in the meeting. So we felt the need to train them on gender inclusion and gender and social inclusion. And as the project went on, we noticed the behavioral changes that allow them, when you ask for people, they are intentionally including women and youth in everything they are doing, bringing them to the table. Another thing we're able to do, we leverage both on offline and online tools. We didn't restrict ourselves to only physical meetings. Where I work is a very insecurity prone area. It's a high risk area. So because we cannot go there, we have to make provision for online meetings. We provided the tools for them and then we meet with them online. So leveraging on that. So our approach is actually not perfect. Like it is evolving and we are adapting as a whole. What I've learned is that challenges should not silence us. As young people, challenges should not silence us. They should motivate and sharpen us. Personally, I have seen that work out for me in my life, and then I'm also saying that to the young people in this conference. If we want more young people to engage in development, we need to start by meeting them where we are. Where are these young people? Social media, informal places, in schools, and the likes of it. We need to meet them there. And we also need to speak their languages. Over here in Nigeria, almost every month we have some slangs that young people have coined. So you have to move with the trend. You have to keep evolving. So for young people to speak their language, highlight everyday heroes, not just global icons. In our communities, in our local communities, we have heroes in our communities. It's easy for me to identify, to relate with a hero that is from my community, than for me to relate with a hero that is from the US, the United States. Why? Because that person I believe has gone through the challenges I've gone through. He understands what I feel. And if he or she can do this, that means myself, I can do it. So let's always speak about local heroes. So, and also, let's show the youth that development is not only for experts. Youth need to understand, young people need to understand that development is not for experts. You don't need to go to the four walls of the classroom to be a development actor. Little practices, little acts we do makes us development actor. Like you leading a cleanup in your community, you talking to someone that is traumatized and helping someone find hope, building someone's confidence. You are a development worker. You are a development actor. We need to use peer-to-peer models in our approach to development. Sometimes young people understand it better when young people speak to them than when adults speak to them. So why not let's train young people to train other young people? We use that technique also during my work in this project, the EU-funded project foundation. In our program, when young people train other young people, the impact multiplies. It builds confidence, trust, and a sense of shared ownership. We also need to define what success looks like. Some young people don't celebrate little successes. They are waiting for it to be a multi-million project, a big appointment before they celebrate it. As people have a conversation that has changed their lives, is a success. We need to celebrate every success. In my experience, the most effective approach are those that are community-led and context-specific. Solutions work best when they are rooted in the realities of people they are made for. I've found that applying inclusive and intersectional lenses, factoring gender, factoring ethnicity, race, age, ability, and identity, makes development more just and sustainable. When we factor all those intersectionality, all those differences in our programming, in our work, we make development more sustainable and just. Equally, a powerful tool also is peer-to-peer model that I mentioned before. Training, building the capacity of youth to build the capacity of more youth, thereby multiplying our results and our impacts. And not to forget strategic collaboration. For us to achieve this sustainable development, we need strategic collaboration with the government, the leaders, the traditional religious leaders, the civil society organizations. Development is more powerful when it's collective. It's more powerful when it's inclusive. And also, it's more powerful when it's owned by the people. So we need development to be collective, inclusive, and owned by the people it is meant for. If I had to choose one area of focus, it would be in investing in agency of young people at the grassroots level, especially the fragile and underdeserved communities. Yes, I prefer all these development initiatives that focuses on young people from the rural communities. Someone will ask why? Why not the urban communities? Why not those in the cities? This is because the little efforts that you make in those rural communities makes 1,000 impacts. These people, when you go to these communities, they are far from development. You go to communities, they don't have potable water. You go to some communities, they don't have a good healthcare facility. It will be shocking to know that at some communities, women still die because of at childbirth because of low healthcare facility. So such communities now, we have communities that have no school, or maybe they just one big building. They don't have to do class grade 1 to 3. Every day they are joined in one classroom to learn. So such communities, when a little effort will speak for volume to those communities. I prefer to work in those communities because I believe that's where the pain and the potential are greatest. These are the places where those development are often distant, yet where small intervention can shift mindset and inspire movement, as I said. When young people in these communities are equipped with tools, with capacity, trust, and a platform to lead, they don't just change their own lives. They ignite transformation around them, whether it is peace building, whether it is health, whether it is education or climate resilience. Focusing on youth leadership creates a ripple effect that outlasts project and reshape the future from inside out. From my experience, let me just give a brief, share a brief story. During our program when we started, we spoke with local communities. I remember the first time we had a training. We brought people from the local communities to the state capital. Most of them would not even talk. They would not stand up to talk because they were timid. They were not used to it. But as our program went on, before we finished the program earlier this year, most of them, when we call for a meeting, they were the ones requesting to speak. So for me, that's a huge success. Most times these type of successes are not recorded in big reports and all that, but that's a good success. Also talking about people with disability, a woman once said that before our project came, what she normally, they don't invite them to meetings, and even when they invite them, it's just to fill up a number. But they saw how we were able to give them space to talk. Because I am personally an advocate for gender equality and social inclusion. So in all my programming, I'm really deliberate with including the minorities and vulnerable. And I give them all the fair hearing, the space, the platform to speak. Sometimes you can clearly see that when you say, okay, you speak, some people will be shutting them down. Also, just to make sure, when we started our program, when you call for mobilization of people, you hardly see women, you hardly see youth. I had to ask them, is it that you don't have women or youth in your communities? They started thinking, but then they brought people just to fill the number and not people to speak. I was more deliberate about that, and then as the project was coming to an end, it ended, there was a mindset change, and then we were able to be doing the intentional mobilization as it is expected. So for me, sometimes development does not look like big building. We don't have to look at development like a big building project, a big solar borehole, and the rest. It looks like a young person daring to speak, like the young woman that said she cannot speak boldly. I remember we did a state level activity. One of those women that could not speak was the one standing on stage and sharing her experience to the state. So development for me, it looks like how we act and what we believe in development. Not just about policies. It's about the people who we are. It's about helping people believe that they matter. So, would like to say, how do we reimagine this development? I'll be asking myself, when I saw the topic, I was asking myself, how do we then reimagine this development? We begin by trusting young people, our leaders, to some extent. They don't really trust young people 100%. We need to trust young people. We don't need to trust them to participate. It's not about participation, it's not about numbers. We begin by trusting young people, not just in participation, but to lead the processes. We need to invest in young people's ideas. We need to invest and elevate their stories. We need to amplify their voices and dismantle the barriers that keep them on the sidelines. We listen to each other, we listen to the communities we serve, and we need to amplify voices that are often not heard. As young people, we need to commit to justice, we need to commit to equity, we need to commit to peace and inclusion, not just in our words, but in our action. Most times people make speeches of, I am here to do this, but then when they act, they are acting contrary to what they have said. So we need to commit not just by word, but also by action. I need to remember that development is not a title. It's a mindset. It is a daily decision to choose courage over comfort, hope over fear, and inclusion over exclusion. So my fellow young leaders, you are already enough. Don't wait to be invited to that table. Build your own table. Don't underestimate the power in your voice, the power of your voice. Use it as little as it is, no matter as little as the platform might be. Use your voice. Don't be discouraged by slow change. Maybe you feel like you are not doing more. Remember that the seeds grow silently. They don't grow in the day. You don't need permission to lead. Just start where you are with what you have, and the rest will follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience. Now, I pass the floor over to Monica for a 10-minute intervention. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Monica, and I'm a GLODEP alumni from the core 2023. And first I would like to thank the consortium for this opportunity. It's always a pleasure to be back. As a young professional in the development sector, I see my role as both a bridge, connecting generations, discipline to work views from information and experience, and as someone who loves to question and reshape the system we work within. I try to approach this field always as a learner, listening to colleagues, communities, and especially the people we serve. And at the same time, I feel the responsibility to challenge established practices when they reinforce inequality or disempowerment. I try to bring forward values that I believe are necessary and essential for the future of our sector, which for me are gender equality, inclusive language, environmental and social sustainability. But perhaps most importantly, I tried myself to establish an approach that shifts away from paternalistic and colonialist approaches that sadly still characterize a lot of public development today. In my opinion, development should not be about managing vulnerability, but it should be about co-creating strength and restoring agency. Personally, as I see my role and what I would like to contribute to this sector is bringing back the role of NGOs not just as aid providers, but as civic actors. Historically, NGOs have spoken truth to power, fought for justice, and formed part of a broader movement of humanitarian resistance, and I think it's time to re-engage with this role. And this is what I would like to contribute to the sector. Because for me, upholding neutrality doesn't mean to stay silent in the face of injustice, which is happening very often. It means staying grounded in our values and in the communities we serve, rather than political agendas. Our generation, in my opinion, brings unique sensitivity that is shaped by multicultural experiences like GLODEP, digital connectivity, and acute awareness of global inequalities. And what we're asking, and what I try to ask myself every day, is not to deliver better programs, not how to deliver better programs, but how to transform the system so that inclusion and justice are starting points and not byproducts. That means, of course, moving beyond total legalization, symbolic participation, but moving toward genuine power sharing and community leadership. Development today has to blend technical excellence with political consciousness, in my opinion. And I see many young professionals ready to carry this forward, committing to a meaningful and structural change. Young people in development, in my opinion, should position themselves as actors capable of playing within the system, but while also working to change its rules from the inside. And from my own experience, I believe this is still possible, especially in smaller and medium-sized organizations or from grassroots movements, even if the dominant tendency in the sector often suggests otherwise. When you ask what's the role of young people in development, I think they are essential drivers of change because we are communicators, we are mobilizers, we are critical thinkers, but most of all, we are innovators. We are able to question the status quo. We are able to challenge entrenched power structures and expose contradictions in the system that we take for granted. We are unafraid to imagine alternatives, and we have to be unafraid of imagining alternatives. So this power of rethinking reality that is inherent to the youth, I think it's our most powerful contribution in the sector. There is proof that when given the opportunity, young people have shown extraordinary capacity to take responsibility, inspire communities, transform communities. But I really think that for that to happen, the sector itself has to change. We need more structured long-term pathways for youth engagement, and most of all, we need institutions that are open to dialogue, that are ready to be challenged, and are ready to grow with us. In terms of the values and the pillars that I see in the development sector today, I think I already mentioned some. Of course, the humanitarian principles stay as pillars. But I also consider very important dignity, dialogue, partnership, co-creation, and sustainability, which are pillars that communities today rightly expect. It's not just something we have to provide in projects for donors. And above all these values, I think what I will not stop stressing is resilience and resistance. As you mentioned today, we live in a time of overlapping crises, shrinking resources, growing instability, and I think it's resilience that keeps development, people, communities, and institutions to continue development to evolve. When you ask how do we work today in such a turbulent environment and how do we have an impact today, I think I get from my past experiences, although very brief experiences, as I'm a very young professional in this sector. I mostly work in emergency settings, and what I've learned from these experiences is that the most relevant and important thing that organizations can do today is preparing for uncertainty. It's planning, having safety protocols. This is the most relevant and most important thing we need to do, even though it might be paradoxical. Also, I think when thinking about challenges, there is also an important human aspect. As it has been mentioned today, I'm working with an organization that was founded in Ukraine and then had to flee to the country when the war started. And with them, they also helped some of their beneficiaries, which are mainly orphans with disabilities, flee to Italy for their security. And I think thanks to this experience and working with colleagues that were stuck in Gaza, I've understood how it's difficult and how immense is the psychological toll that people working in development, especially when they are displaced and especially when they are continuously affected by war, bring by working every day tirelessly. It's incredibly hard in this situation to maintain morale when your loved one are at risk, And when the scale of devastation feels overwhelming, when individual actions feel so small. But I've also learned that in these moments, small acts like offering safety, dignity, and mental comfort take on a meaning that goes far beyond their scale. Helping someone navigate a new country, supporting children and women in a safe space. These might seem like very modest gestures, but in reality they are, in my opinion, acts of resistance. They are quite affirmation of humanity, even in the face of brutality, and together I think they contribute to a larger cumulative impact, one that fosters healing, resilience, and change. Lastly, I think one of the greatest challenges that organizations and NGOs are facing today is the phase of funding, especially USA funding, which has made the life of many organizations very difficult. But despite this, why I speak about resistance? Because despite this, I've seen NGOs continue to uphold their missions, ensure that no one is left behind. And that too, for me, is a form of resistance against a world that increasingly develops solidarity, empathy, and long-term commitment. Even when underfunded and underorganized, our role is to uphold peace, dignity, and inclusion, especially as young leaders. As for why I chose this path and how I would push people to choose this path, for me, it came from a deep sense of rage and a deep sense of injustice that at some point was impossible to ignore, and that for me became a sort of call to act. And I believe many young people today carry the same emotional weight. We see the cracks in our system, the inequality, the violence, the climate emergencies, but we can't look away. We care deeply, and sometimes this care becomes pain. But that pain, in my opinion, can be transformed into purpose thanks to this professional path. Choosing to work in this field for me is a daily decision to stand against a system that perpetuates inequality and conflict. That's why I stress so much the accent on resistance. Of course, resistance means protesting in the streets, but sometimes it also looks like creating a safe space, helping someone feel seen, or simply continue to show up for these people. And these acts matter. They challenge indifference. Regarding my brief experience and when talking about approaches, I think the most effective and relevant ones are participatory and intersectional approaches, which are those that create real power for sharing and leave room for internal equity. The kind of work that leads to long-term transformation and not just surface level change. And I also think it's time to restart thinking about development through the lenses of social classes, which today are very much often ignored, but especially for the kind of development issues that I'm seeing in Italy, for example, the migratory problem, these are still very relevant and too much ignored. If I had to choose where to focus most urgently, I would say we need to make development a driver of civic action and advocacy again, especially now, when inequalities are deepening and civic space is shrinking. And development must rediscover its transformative role. This, for me, is the most important thing that we have to do, and we have to carry on as young professionals today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Monica. Now over to you, Alish.
Okay, so in a divided world full of noise and distraction, we've heard about big things right now. Sometimes the most powerful change begins in silence, when a parent pauses, looks into a child's eye, and chooses love and compassion even in scarcity. So my name is Aruj Fatima. I'm from Pakistan. I'm a GLODEP alumni. Thank you so much, GLODEP Consortium, for having me here. It's always a great pleasure to be back in one place. Back in Pakistan, I'm a veteran practitioner and a young woman who believes that reimagining development does not require millions. It requires meaning. I lead programs that empower parents and caregivers because I truly believe that we're not just raising children, we're raising societies. To this platform today, as a young person, I bring urgency. As a Pakistani, I bring resilience. And as a GLODEP alumni, I bring systems thinking into lived experiences. As an overview, I work at the intersection of behavioral science, storytelling, and community-led innovation, leading national-level parenting and early childhood programs in Pakistan for UNICEF Pakistan under the collaboration and guidance with an organization that I'm currently employed with, that's White Tribes. Interesting name, no? So our work, like our name, is also very interesting. We are a creative impact studio, and we help mission-driven organizations solve complex societal problems through behavior change and design. So in this session, I would like to reflect on what it means to reimagine development from the ground up. When the change begins with empowered communities, informed frontline workers, and a quiet but radical belief that every child requires responsive care. So we all agree that change is necessary, right? But coming from a place like Pakistan, where change is not at all easy, so my role as a young leader to reimagine development is to bridge that gap by designing programs that not just talk at people, but actually truly engage them. So for me, it's crucial to co-create solutions alongside communities. Now, for me and my organization, co-creation is a concept that sits at the heart of whatever we do. So, thank you, Monica, for actually mentioning co-creation. So, what does it mean? It means that we just don't sit in the capital in Islamabad behind our desks, design a program, and just roll it out. No. What we actually do is we actually go into the communities, take their problem to them, and ask them and invite them to become a part of the solution. So we listen to their perspectives, we understand their needs, and we co-create a solution that's a part of their lived experience, their lived reality or reality. So whether it's motivating or it's making a father realize the importance of his role through an emotionally charged national short film that was aired on national television a couple of weeks ago, or turning WhatsApp chats into digital classrooms, whatever we do, we brought that solution somehow from the communities, and I think that's where the real power of reimagining development lies, building from the ground up. So, another powerful, whenever we talk about change, another powerful lever for change that sits at the heart of my work is something that's called behavior science and social change. So, have you heard about it? I work as a social behavior change program manager. So, I wouldn't explain it in difficult terms here, but okay, let's take it this way. As young leaders, you, me, we're often told to think big, right? Numbers, scale, where's the visibility, how are we scaling up, what are we doing? But you know what? Behavioral science has actually taught me, made me realize that change always and often starts very small. So it's either through a story, a nudge, a prompt, but that's reinforced, repeated, and relevant and personal to somebody who's receiving it, right? So we've used these tools to design programs that reach hearts before the minds. And trust me, that's where the foundation of behavior change lies. And we have changed behavior in communities and we're scaling programs nationally. So I am very proud to say that in Pakistan, we have launched Pakistan's first Sesame-style puppet-based parenting series, where love, connection, and play comes to life through puppets and through characters that feel like. Next, we've developed multiple WhatsApp learning programs. What was the idea behind WhatsApp learning programs? The idea was simple: digital, micro-learning, reaching people at scale. So through our content, many frontline workers, hundreds of them, especially women, our content reaches to them in the remotest areas of Pakistan, where they get those bite-sized micro lessons, put them in practice, and even impart those practices into the communities far from. So we've developed these programs for communities, for frontline workers, for parents, for caregivers, for public sector teachers, and so on. And lastly, and most importantly, we have redesigned and optimized an entire national parenting package for UNICEF Pakistan. And trust me, it's not just dry manuals. It's empathy tools that basically are grounded in behavior science with hundreds of hand-sketched illustrations, series of animated videos tested in the villages and communities, and now being scaled to government systems. To me, this is how I reimagine development. So at the core, I would reiterate that at the core, at the center, we empower parents and caregivers with better knowledge, with more confidence. Next, we mobilize families and communities. So in order to drive that change, to change those social norms. And at the outer layer, we align with policies and systems. Because again, this is not systems enforced. This is an entire ecosystem that's grown with care. Because there's a very, very famous African proverb we've added to it, and we truly believe in it, that raising a child takes more than a parent. It takes a whole community. So, all of this sounds promising, no? But you might wonder what the challenges are. Especially, of course, coming from Pakistan, we work in a terrain that is not at all easy. So you talk about child statistics, 1 in 3 child is stunted. Almost half of them are not developmentally on track. We have climate shocks, we have underfunded systems. The needs are massive and the resources often are not. As a personal journey, development is also very challenging. It is not always glamorous. It means long hours of travel, times away from home, and working in places far from the cities. More often than not, you're not holding a mic. You're not holding a mic, you're holding silence and scorching heats, listening to parents, homes, communities, schools, medical centers where systems hardly reach. So yes, we might not have a lot of resources, but we work with what we have, and what we have is hard. Being a woman in Pakistan, it's a whole lot of challenges balancing time between family and work, but I'm eternally grateful to my husband and my family for joining me in this shared vision with the same heart. So together, UNICEF, government, White Rice, me, my family, my entire team at White Rice, we have turned a village bedsheet into a cinema screen. WhatsApp groups into classrooms, and a puppet show into a national parenting tool. And very excited, we just launched a Brad-style play lab in the remotest village of Sindh, where the entire idea is for parents to come and enjoy sensory-rich learning. So they learn those things and go back and practice that with the children at home. So I think challenges are everywhere, but these challenges drive us to innovate, to find creative ways to make a real difference. And look at us now, we are aiming to reach 20 million children by 2026, and we will do it. So, after all the details that I've given you, what would you expect if I say that if you ask me, what should the world focus on? Can anybody say? What should the world focus on?
Bring up kids and also doing the sustainable.
Yeah, that's great. So yes, if you ask me today, especially today's world that feels more divided and more challenged than ever, I would say first 5 years of a child's life. So before we talk about GDP, before we talk about climate, before we talk about economy, even national security or national policy, we should ask one pertinent question to ourselves. Who are we raising to lead this future? I repeat, who are we raising to lead this future? 90% of the brain develops by the age a child is 5. And we do not see parenting and policy in practice around us. So those early years, you lay the foundation of security, empathy, and human connection, the very things that are broken in the system today. So I think I've made my case that investing in early childhood development, in caregivers, in parents, at the core is the smartest, boldest, and most beautiful development decision one can make. Without nurturing care, without investing in early learning, no sustainable development goals can be truly achieved. Not in education, not in health, not in equality. Because children, they are the foundation of every solution that we're creating. And parenting, I tell you, parenting is power. But it's about time that we put the power in the right hands of those who are actually raising the future. So, I will keep some points for the discussion later on. But to all the young people who are sitting here, I would just say that we are not the future. We are the interruption to the systems that no longer serve us. So the speakers before me talked about resilience, about authenticity, that the young child hold, that the young youth holds. So to all the young leaders watching this, I would just have a small message that start noticing what breaks your heart. That's your blueprint. Mine was watching brilliant children fail because parents were not supported. I've been working for development for over 12 years now, even at the time when I did not know what the meaning development meant. I was a graduate from Pakistan's top business school, and I was just not thinking that I'm a good fit for the corporate world. Until I got lucky and my paths crossed, and I was able to join the Global Development Policy Program, and the rest is history. So I would just give this one message. Lastly, I would just close by saying that for me, reimagining development is not just about fixing systems. It's basically helping people realize their power, helping individuals and parents realize their power. So, interestingly, yesterday I was having a conversation with my neighborhood friends. They asked me that what does success look like to you personally? So I didn't even take a moment, and I replied that it's the spark in a father's eyes when he realizes that he's more than just a provider. That's so common in Pakistan. It's the warmth on his face when he finally understands that his words and his actions mean the world to his child. These kinds of moments, they don't make headlines, but trust me, it is so transformative because in that instant, you know that you've changed the entire trajectory of a child's life. So I would just conclude by saying that for me, I feel very privileged to nurture the early years of a child's life, but not only as a practitioner, but as a true believer of the possibilities that nurturing care and responsive caregiving can bring when it becomes a shared responsibility. So, and that's the work I'm trying to build, one behavior, one family, one brave conversation at a time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aruj. Now over to Jay, please.
Thank you very much. So, just before I start, I would like to ask everyone a favor. So, if you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. I know it's been a hard week for all of you. I know you are tired. I've been seeing some faces. I've been there. So thank you very much for this piece. I first just wanted to start thanking Pulaski University, the GLODEP Consortium, particularly Professor Lenka, Professor Simona, Professor Mirek, that is not here, Professor Pascal, that directed my thesis. Just to share a brief story, as I put the timer, because I don't want to pass my time. I've never been more stressed in my entire life than when I was waiting the response after my interview for entry to this program. Never. It never happened before, and it haven't happened after. So I've never been more stressed in my entire life. But if it wasn't because of the people that worked so hard for that, I wouldn't be where I am right now. So I'm incredibly grateful for all the people that have been working both in as a connection to our support. So I wanted to start saying that. And now, just as Josh mentioned before, we were given some guiding questions when they invited us to this panel, right? And it's been close to a month that they gave us these questions. I've been trying to reflect on them since. I do have reflections for all of them, but due to the time, I don't think I will manage to cover them all. But I just want to clarify first. If there's anything else that you get interested afterwards, you can always look for me either in person, I'm going to be here this week, or you can write to me or whatever, and you can reach out. We can get deep into many of these topics, right? But sadly, right now, we only have 10 minutes. So when they told us, you will go to the panel, you will have 10 minutes to talk, I was like, I should better say something important, right? Because these are 10 minutes. I should better make good use of them. The first thing I thought, who is going to be the public of this panel, right? So I know it's quite diverse, but in my view, the main public of this panel is you, that you are almost going to graduate, right? Like you are going to graduate by the end of this week. So congratulations. So I thought you are the main public for this conference, right? So I should better say something that is important about for you guys. So I'm going to go one by one of these questions that we received. And I wrote them down because I didn't want to drift too much because we have limited time. So the first one was, how do you see your role as a young person in development? How do you want to contribute? How are you contributing to it? So then I put it in these terms. Well, they asked, how do you see your role as a young person? But I'm taking it more, what's the role of young persons in the world? And I thought about it, and then I came to the conclusion that being young is a descriptive category, right? Like young is a particular term that is bound to a series of characteristics. And so too is its role. As young people, we, generally speaking, have limited work experience. We have the gross knowledge that we have gathered from the school and our personal experiences. We have dreams. We have a passion to prove ourselves. But we also have fear and uncertainty of what's going to become of us, right? So what's our role? Well, talking from a personal standpoint, this role obeys to those characteristics. So as a starting point, it materializes as the role of a pupil. What do I mean by that? It doesn't matter that we have so many studies behind us. When we are embarking in the world of development, we should be eager to learn. Because in this field, so many things can be done, and from a vastly different amount of factors. That's what I've seen in the working environment. Like almost anything that you can think about has a relationship to development somehow. So even if you don't work for a development agency, probably there's a way to give a shift in whatever profession towards development. So what happened to me was that I started working, taking whatever work they would give to me. Because to be honest, not everyone has the real option to choose where they want to work. You pick whatever they offer, right? Not everyone has the position of, no, I don't take this sector, I don't take that. So the first part is, I start working in whatever they would give. And by this point, I have worked on exploring the effects of climate change and natural disasters on employment. I have analyzed the trends of official development assistance in developing countries. I have helped in reforms to inland revenue administrations, provided analytical assistance for national revenue transfer systems, and a few other more. But these projects have been vastly different from one another, and I'm still grasping all the interconnections that these have with other sectors. So it's just as I was saying before. Almost anything can be related to development. But then, their final value is still obscure to me. There can be a lot of efforts in what you do. My personal experience, into the projects that I've worked on. But if they are not implemented, or there are eventualities like some things occur, they may not have helped a single person. So this is all part of what do we expect and what is the realism of our expectations. Given said expectations, I do have personal interest in development of young professionals here. And that connects to the second question. Why should young people engage in development? As I was saying before, development can be found in almost any field that you can think of. But many fields, not only development, need a generational shift. This is to say, we need to learn, and I think this is the advice that I give you from my perspective. We need to learn from those more experienced. So we can build on top of that and not to let that knowledge to disappear or become obsolete. Once you start getting into development working environment, you will find so much brilliant people. And at least in the agency that I'm working on, in the World Bank, there's a lot of people that is close to retirement age. So once you interact with them, you are like, wow, these people really know what they talk about. But then if you don't learn from them, once they are retired, what happened to that knowledge, right? So I think the first role of young people is to be eager to learn from the best practices. But it's not only that, because we are also bringing our actions, we are also bringing to our actions the baggage of our times. So that means we bring our current concerns, we bring our values, we bring our level of fluency for emerging technologies, and most importantly, we bring our dreams. So I believe youth must be very aware that it's up to them to learn from the best practices, speak out against what's wrong, and build their dreams from that foundation. We are all in the process of becoming the best version of ourselves, not just for our own sake, but for those around us as well. And given that I have very close to 2 minutes, I'm going to go to the last reflection that I want to mention to you guys. That is, where do you see the biggest sense to focus and why? I was saying before, this field is really vast, and there's always urgency for many things. So I think first you focus on yourself, in the person you want to become, and you take it from there, with small steps at a time, because it is really difficult. And as I was mentioning before, you may not have all the options available to you at once. Well, you won't have all the options available to you at once. But if you have a particular dream, you just find your way to insert yourself into that work, and you take it from there. But you have to keep that goal in your mind. So this is related to other reflections, but just to conclude, so it is hard to say what needs more attention, because the particularities of the immediate sphere of each one of you is what is going to determine your reality. That's where you are going to spend 90% of your time. It's not the entire world. You can care about the entire world. I'm not saying you should not, but 90% of your time, you are going to be surrounded from really particular circumstances. And that's probably your immediate sphere of influence. So that's where you can put your dreams as well. So if you ask me at this stage, what do you need to focus more? Is in yourself. Try to secure a living, start building from there, without forgetting those that you love and those that helped you to be where you are now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay, for your impeccable self-regulation. Our last speaker for the day, please welcome.
Thank you so much, Joshua.
Sorry, keep the microphone here because we can't hear you from online.
Okay.
I think I turned it off.
I will try like this. Is it better? Yeah.
Much better, thank you.
Good. Thank you so much, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for having me. Actually, it's my great pleasure and honor. I will try to be as disciplined as you are time-wise, but I, coming from outside of this beautiful, not only faculty, but also the University of Palacky, but being a friend of GLODEP and of these two excellent ladies that I can call friends, both Lenka and Simona, and with whom I have the pleasure to cooperate for quite a few years already. I'll try to dedicate the time to our discussion. Just to start with, I wanted to make a personal connection maybe to the project, because when this whole project was actually starting, we started discussing with Simona about my own experience with Erasmus Mundus program that I had from a sister institution, University of Glasgow, as Joshua mentioned. We started brainstorming how to do this, and I remember meeting Simona in Prague actually and discussing how to design this, and I can see that there has been so much achieved. This is really impressive, and I wanted to thank you for doing what you are doing, putting the whole GLODEP consortium together and bringing you guys to Olomouc, because it makes me proud that all of you are here, coming to Czechia, coming to Olomouc, to this beautiful city, and achieving something that is magnificent. And learning from you, actually, it's my great honor actually to sit here with you around the table, because there is a vast of knowledge and so much has been already achieved around the globe. So Olomouc, GLODEP, and Palacky University really achieving some global impact, and I'm so happy that I could be part of this little story and sit around here with you. So that's my personal introduction here. I hope this can go up beyond the horizon of 10 minutes, because beyond that, I prepared 3 points for you actually to maybe share a little bit about what we do. We are coming from this country, from the Czech Republic. We are a Prague-based institution serving as a think tank for the last 25 years. Doing a lot over the past more than 2 decades, actually, working with young people, and this is how we started around in the 1990s, when the country finally turned democratic after the fall of communism in this country, when young people that are now involved in high-level politics or ministry level came together and started working along the lines of foreign policy, development, also security. This is what now think tank actually has been dealing with for quite a few years, and they started organizing this model of United Nations and bringing more and more people actually together to dedicate time. Because if I feel that there is one problem among many others that we have in this country, it's usually that we are stuck with our own little reality, and this is making our discussion and global. This is really fascinating, as I mentioned before. So this is what we are also trying to contribute to, organizing the so-called Prague Student Summit. Each year we have hundreds of young people that we try to work with and bring them to this, speaking English to each other, negotiating, getting interested about what's happening in the world, in Nigeria, in Pakistan, Mexico, in Manila, Philippines, and elsewhere actually, just really getting them away from the everyday business, have their heads up and think about what's happening in the world. So this is what we have been doing for many years. This year we tried to collect 10,000 of young people that went through the models in the past, and we actually achieved doing that. We have a huge alumni base, including now the current Minister of Foreign Affairs, and many people that went through this and actually are part of the foreign security, but also development infrastructure, and wherever Czechs are involved at the national level, at the international level, at the sub-national level as well. So this is where we are coming from, and when we spoke about it with Lenka, actually how we are fitting in, I think we are fitting in, because we also have been doing a lot of things actually that are relevant and And as we mentioned, many things can be drawn back to development, right? And us working in foreign security policy domain, that naturally brings us close to this. By working on things that were mentioned before, reconstruction of Ukraine, what has been happening with the country when engaging in Western Balkan countries, promoting democratization, sharing our transformation experience from post-communist authoritarian context, the command-driven economy into a rather flourishing liberal democratic system and also market-oriented one. That has been a country's know-how, which we have tried to work with for many years now, primarily engaged in Ukraine, Belarus, but also Western Balkan countries, in the past also in the MENA region, actually, to share what we can offer and share with our partners for further discussion. So this is why I think our contribution can be relevant and fit in to discussion. And as the second point, I wanted to be a little bit critical because working as a think tank also brings us into what Lenka mentioned. This is the policy and strategic level of the discussion. Some of us also being practitioners of what we are discussing here today, but also some of us offering food for thought what can be done, and also how to reflect on what's going on. And if you allow me to stay a little Eurocentric, because when I prepare for you, then I realized it's completely missing the bigger picture at the beginning, and then I just woke up to this reality and we'll try to connect this further. But there were already a couple of points mentioned, and I think, and colleagues already spoke about it. We are living in very uneasy times. These are times of unpredictability. Donald Trump is just one example of that. Insecurity, many conflicts around the world. It's not just Ukraine. Even if we in Europe are primarily focused on Ukraine and Czechia, that applies twice. But there is much more across the world. We see in your region of Indo-Pacific actually rising appetite of the Chinese communist regime, to put pressure. There are conflicts India, Pakistan. We can go back to Latin American countries and what has been happening to many of the countries of Latin America. But of course also the domestic polarization and insecurity inside of the United States that needs to fit in the picture as well. And of course, there is also withdrawal of the wealthy part of the world, of some of the primary donors and funders. We spoke about the United States that has cut off most of the funding, USAID, and many others, which actually puts us in Europe in a very, very difficult situation. Are we able to pick it up, and are we able to fit in all the necessary needs and correspond with the new rising challenges and demands? And this is a question that many, including in Brussels at the EU level, but also at the member state level, said really no, we are not. And this is something that has been visible in many parts of the world, not only our immediate neighborhood, but many of the countries that you are speaking from, just missing resources nowadays because there is less to distribute. There's more egoism, less of international aid, international development, and definitely more of self-centric type of behavior. And this is worrying. This is strongly worrying, and unfortunately, this has also affected the minds and the doings of people inside of Brussels, inside of the European Commission, when switching or slowly but surely moving into the direction when it comes to promoting less of values and more of interest. And we are more looking for materials and critical raw materials and rare earths and everything else than we used to do when investing in countries' developments, lowering the inequalities that was mentioned repeatedly, actually, and making world more secure and prosperous place for all. That's less on the agenda, and we have to face it. And we also need to speak and think about how we can respond to this. And this is my third point, because when referring to this more chaotic world and less predictable world, and a world based on fewer rules and more of muscles, we also need to think and brainstorm about what we can do to this and how we can respond. And I already started discussing and speaking to you from our perspective, which is very strongly connected to work with young people, education, and bringing people to the knowledge of the problems, because this is clearly the first step, but there needs to be much more. And that's why, as a think tank, we try to be engaged at the national, EU, and also international level, especially when it comes to the global discussion about the green agenda and green sustainable development. This is where we are trying to follow the global trends, but also help shape this. But there is much more in our work that we are trying to do, and I will go a little bit back to where I focus, which is on Eastern Europe and Russia and Ukraine, and the Russian aggression against Ukraine was mentioned earlier before, but that has been the number one challenge for us in the Czech Republic, facing the wave of refugees, all the consequences of the war, even if we don't have the bombs falling on our roofs and killing people here on an everyday basis as much as it happens in Ukraine. We still see so much happening, and seeing a lot of consequences actually falling on people's heads here. And these are socio-economic, these are also very physical consequences. We also see global assertiveness of countries like Russia or China having the appetite actually to attack the country's territories, not only their neighbors but also in the West. In this country, we saw a couple of cases of sabotage, and direct attacks against critical infrastructure, and things like that. And then, of course, we need to think about how we can best respond to this. But going back to what is the matter of our discussion today, and this is the role of young people in all of this actually. I can speak on behalf of myself actually, and what we also were asked to provide some successes, right? And where we try to stick to and have as a moral compass is the value-driven perspective. And this is for me, myself, in the civil society support and democratization, because that's actually where I used to be working in the past, and I'm still majorly dedicated. This is to uplift the democratic voices, even if in difficult contexts. And I spoke about Russia a little bit, but I wanted to just share for 1 minute a story that we did actually, and what matters to this country nowadays, because we are actually facing parliament elections, crucial parliament elections that are putting many of the issues that we are discussing today from the Czech national perspective on the question. This is what happens next in the Czech approach to development cooperation. This is what happens next to our democratization support. We might face a moment in our country's history that we have a upcoming government that will not be caring about this at all, actually. Putting all of this in dustbin and removing a big part of the country's credentials that applies both to development cooperation, to democratization, but also international commitments, including, for example, a green and sustainable agenda. So this is what we need to be also having in front of us, and that's why we try to so much invest in consensus building. And one of these affairs that I myself was committed to is also to uplift the voices in difficult contexts, and that's why at the end of 2021 we started and launched this initiative called Czech Friends of Free Russia. That was still before the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine happened. We, through this, actually started putting together voices that are and actors that are relevant for helping people, critical voices inside of Russian society, going against the regime, trying to criticize Putin's aggression already back in the day against Ukraine, but not to the scale that we saw over the past 3 years. And we put together not only civil society actors that are usually talking to each other, but we also felt the need that we also need some kind of support. And that's why we reached to the country's political elite and representatives of the democratic forces in the political demand back then all opposition forces against the former government actually, and we try to put them together along the lines of similar ideas to help people in need, both representatives of political opposition, independent media, but also civil society organization, and above all one in particular called Memorial. This is an organization long-term based in Russia, working on memory issues, and that tried was liquidated around the time shortly after actually the initiative was launched. So we realized that we need this kind of support, and we also needed more of political attention to this whole agenda, and that's why we launched this network platform. And over the past 3 years, we tried to support people in need, now usually under repressions, but also that still some people from inside, some people from outside actually started and continued fighting the Putin's aggression from inside, protesting against the war and supporting the people in need primarily in Ukraine. So that's a small contribution that we were able to make as an organization to put together more than 20 countries' politicians, both members of parliaments, Chamber of Deputies, the lower chamber, upper chamber, and the Senate, but also European Parliament, and to pick this agenda and place it on the country's map. And through this, actually, we then lobbied after the situation changed, after the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine, to launch a special program actually to support those people in the need, the so-called civil society program that was launched by the MFA under our pressure also, and we provided shelter and we provided help to people in need. So that was something that we tried to do actually as one example, as young people and people that are dedicated to the agenda can actually make a difference, and to do at least a little bit actually to contribute to making the world more livable, and conditions for people that believe in democracy and shared values actually uh, withstanding and mitigating this kind of pressure on them. So that's something that I wanted to share with you, and also call for more of people coming together, more solidarity to each other, us helping each other, creating alliances of like-minded people, but also sometimes working with actors that are not always the easiest one to work with, or not always in our scope. And here is especially relevant for development, and I think we didn't quite spend enough time on this, but I feel that there's a lot that can be still achieved in cooperation with business. And I think we need to also speak about that more, because where the resources lie, it's not only all public funding, but there is also the private capital. And enlightened people that believe that there might be something better than we see today in this insecure and unpredictable world. People that actually are like-minded and want to go and fight for the change that we've spoken about today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pavel. I would like to thank all our panelists for today, Linda, Monica, Aruj, Jay, and Pavel. You're not yet off the hook. As according to our program, I should ask some questions to our panelists, and then they will provide me with some answers. And because I think it's an interest for the group or the people present in this room and those online, for you to ask your questions as well, or share your comments and reflections as to what you've heard from our panelists, for this to be a dialogue, of course. So for now, let me open the floor to our audience, both online and here in person. Please introduce yourself. I'll pass on the mic to you so that the people online can hear you. And if you want a specific panelist to address your question or your comments, please do so. So, okay, we have a brave one. I'll give you the mic. Okay.
Thank you so much. My name is Bushra and I'm from Pakistan. Many of the panelists today have talked about the role of young people in steering change. While in the last 2 years, we have seen a live broadcast of a genocide by an apartheid regime. This has been a reality check for many of us naive people who saw that how powerless international law is when the blood of Muslims and brown people is being spilled. At the same time, we saw how young people have been at the forefront of this issue. In our neighboring Germany, young people have been leading anti genocide protests and are brutally beaten up by police. In the US, immigration policies are being weaponized to silence dissent. We also saw how a global march to end siege in Gaza was conveniently dismantled, and the human rights activists in the Flotilla Medellin were illegally detained and taken to Israeli dungeons. What I want to say is that I grew up idealizing UN and dreaming of working there one day. But today I'm disgusted at the mockery of the made out of the United Nations, ICG, and the international law. The global world order is more like an oligarchy right now, which is allowing this genocide to take place in front of all of us and being live broadcasted on all our screens. A man-made famine has been created, and every day we see reports of hundreds killed trying to collect flour for their hungry families. Young people are taking the action, and they're far from being silent. But do you think it's time to steer the conversation towards how the power structures are systemically excluding and trying to break our will and passion by prosecuting us? I feel the development sector is depoliticized, and this is the conversation we need to be having. I would like to ask this question from Monica and any other panelists who want to answer it.
Thank you for that challenging and very wonderful question, and very timely, of course. So, does anyone from our panel would like to? Monica. Okay, please, Monica.
Thank you, Bushra. Did I get your name right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I completely agree with you. I don't need to use all my supporting gestures, but I completely agree with you. I grew up with the same ideals. I wanted to work in the UN. I wanted to upheld international law, which are still ideals in which I believe, but the genocide that is going on is a proof, a constant proof under our eyes that the system is wrong, the system is not working, especially when it comes to international institutions. Something is wrong, and this is exactly what I tried to convey through my speech before. We can see that the system is wrong, and we cannot accept that anymore. That's why I think change doesn't have to come from the international system, from big institutions today, but the real change comes from grassroots activities, comes from CSOs, comes from middle-sized and small-sized NGOs and associations. Even though it is very difficult. It is very difficult because today I see with my eyes that NGOs sometimes have to follow the political agenda, most of them, the biggest one especially, or those ones that don't have the freedom or the power to speak up, because sometimes this happens too. I think this is where we have to restart from. And as you said, young people are silenced in the street. And in Italy, this is a reality that we see every day. I participate myself to protests in the street. I'm part of different grassroots movements. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to protest in the streets. In Italy, recently a decree has been approved to make protesting illegal. That's why I think NGOs can be a key answer to this. Because we are part of the system somehow, we can play with the system somehow, but we can change the rules of this system through the kind of institutional powers NGOs have. But for this to happen, of course, we need to change mentality, we need new perspectives, we need space for young voices in NGOs too, which doesn't happen every day, I must say. But I think that's a point we can start from. NGO can be a support to protest, a support to activism, a support to advocacy, and that's the change I would like to see. But of course, as I said, for this to change, we need to give space to young voices. I don't know if I answered to your question. I think we shared this opinion a lot, and this is my alternative way to think about it, because I agree with your discuss for international institutions right now. But we have to try to find a way to act. We cannot just be mobilized by our disgust, by our deception, by our sadness. We have to find a way to act. And I think we can find this way in a restructuring of NGOs, in stopping to answer to political agendas and be relevant for the communities we serve. The NGO I used to work before was active in Gaza. And that's where our main projects were. And I think what I really appreciated there was the constant support to the population despite political agenda, despite the fact that it would have been easier from a fundraising point of view not to speak about the genocide and not to speak out, because so many donors are against the use of the word genocide in Italy. But the fact that we kept true to ourselves, that's something that I appreciated very much, and that's what I would like to see in the future of third sector and non-profit sector. I don't know if I answered to your question.
Thank you, Monica. Yes, please.
So first of all, thank you so much, Bushra, for the pertinent question. And coming from Pakistan and working in the development sector, I have two things to say. One, stop idolizing UN agencies. Nobody asked us to do so. It was our idea of these organizations. But at the same time, I would say that start doing where you can. So yes, we do need the funding, but then there are other organizations that are actually working in the communities, with the communities, and also I agree that the world is chaotic. It's less predictable. But then again, I would say that work with what you have, and we have the young people. So back in Pakistan, you would agree that we have a huge potential of youth. So I think that we must have systems to make them understand. That's the first step, as Pavel also mentioned. But to make them understand the gravity of the situation and their role in terms of development. And Jay also mentioned that no matter what profession you have, you do have a way to contribute to development. So I think in a world that has turned quite ugly, what we can focus on is the things that are around us, very next to us, and try to make them better. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll pass the floor now to Pavel to respond to the comment or question as well.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Just 2-3 ideas that quickly comes to mind. Actually, I think you very well identified where we are, and I try to hint on this as well. There is a world that is becoming less based on credible rules, institutions, but also any kind of predictability that is for what comes next, actually. The UN is part of that. But I wouldn't just blame the UN for itself, actually. It's also the members that create this environment, and they became these veto players to prevent any kind of change to happen. Of course, we can go to the UN Security Council for the best example of this. Russia attacking its neighbor, sitting on the same Security Council that is supposed to take the decision to actually mandate the change to take place and to finally have peace in the country. This is part of the problem. But this might be at one point also, and this might take quite some time, be part of the solution. But this will need to be driven from inside somehow also. The UN itself is a framework, essentially. And the countries make of this what is possible to make of this. One example, Ukraine has been for quite some time exploring the opportunity, not through the Security Council, which is blocked and irrelevant, largely, but through the General Assembly to launch a special tribunal for all the crimes that have been happening inside of Ukraine. And this, somebody mentioned about this, justice and security, those two going together, right? So that's so important actually. So there might be ways going around these blockades that are definitely present in the international system. So that's one level of it. But then I wanted to also speak briefly about two other things, which is the role of individuals and the role of the people. Because essentially, and it's not only the legitimacy for the public, sorry, the democratic regimes and democratic governance structures actually, but it's where the bigger part of the discussion lies. And I will go back to the what you call genocide, the situation in Pakistan and Israel and all the killing of innocent people and so on. This country has been particularly stubborn on continuing supporting Israel. For different reasons, the political elite always goes this way. It's rather exceptional also at the EU level, but there are two things that are new now. We have, from 2 years ago, we have a new president who has been not only a proponent of the UN reform, but also much more critical position on Israel, a leading guy that has been sort of leading the change of the country's discourse and of the country's mindset. And second, and I actually just yesterday took part in a discussion of young political parties, and the same sentiments that you expressed were very strongly advocated. And I could see the power of young people actually bringing up the change. Because if you put pressure on the country's politicians, then things start to change. So the bottom-up change of mentality, even in countries such stubborn as this one, on always supporting Israel, is slowly but surely coming. Sometimes it takes time, but the young people, as was mentioned repeatedly, they are the anti-status quo. And I think that is the best resource that we really have available, to go either to streets as Monica or anywhere else, to be critical, to reach out to people that actually take the decisions and persuade them that this is not a sustainable course of events. And they also helped to motivate the country's president to say it's not okay anymore to behave like this. So there are things happening here, but sometimes it takes time, and we don't have the time, and we are, for good reason sometimes, not very patient.
Thank you so much, Monica, Aruj, and Pavel. I once again open the floor for interventions. Yes. Let me come to you. You first, and then okay. Yeah. No?
Hello. So we talk about multipolar world now, and the fact the power imbalance in the current global geopolitical world that we see right now. But I want to talk about within country situation, and I want to talk about, since we're talking about the young people and the young leaders, I also want to talk about the old people. So here in these discussions, it's not a critique, but it's a reflection that when we're talking about the young people, we're talking about it as if it's some isolated entity, like the young people operate in some sort of chamber outside of the old people influence. So I want to ask, not just to the panelists and to the, I don't want to call them old people, but to the elder generation, like how can we treat the young people as this isolated entity who can bring change without the help of the older generation? And if so, like how would that look like? And the question is actually to the young people and the young leaders. How would you address that? Thank you.
Okay. Let me.
I just want to add a comment, not answer.
Okay.
Like if this called me as a young leader at the age of 13, then I think that I'm the older generation that guys will be talking about. So I would like anybody else to answer in detail.
So,
He's asking.
no, I got it.
Use the mic, Jay. Hold the mic, yeah.
So, connecting to what I was saying before, if
Please hold the mic closer, we can hear you. Sorry.
can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
That's right.
Just as I was mentioning before, my definition of young people is a set of characteristics, right? But in terms of social interaction, of course, they are not a single separate sphere unit. Sometimes we are not even a single isolated sphere unit, not even in our own families. Right? At the end, we are subject to our own context. And that context is what sets the boundaries of how we think, what we think, and how we act. May not be the same for everyone, but at the end, all of you are influenced by how you grew up, around which people you grew up, which were your role models, right? And even now, you're striving to become the best versions of yourself. So it's definitely, talking about human interactions, it's definitely a whole connection. Like everyone plays a role in who you are and who are you going to turn out to be, right? So when I think about young people, and this is what I was saying before, it's a particular set of characteristics mainly related to the age. So as long, regardless of which country you are, as long as you are below certain threshold of age, you can be considered young. But that threshold also comes with certain characteristics, like as I was mentioning before. Probably you have a scarce working experience, right? And you have a lot of uncertainty of what is going to happen to you, to your family, to things that you care for. It is something different that maybe other people that have been working already for several years and have their living secure, they are going to think different about that, right? So, well, that's my take on it. Everything is interconnected. So no, I don't think young people as a single cell. A single cell may be a person, right? You are a single cell, and then you become the result of everyone else, regardless of their age. That is my take. I don't know if I answered what you were asking. Sorry.
I would just add something before I give to Pavel. That with young people, we basically mean that because we bring the urgency and we challenge the norms. So that doesn't mean that young people are operating in an isolation. It definitely means that to find systems, people, or organizations that actually conform to how we are thinking. So for example, if I've been working for a specific thing I'm passionate about, as a young leader, I have that capability to actually look for relevant organizations, relevant opportunities. So that's the kind of mindset I think that we're talking about here when we're talking about young people and their confidence and capability to do things. I think he wants to answer a question, something.
I want to add to your.
Yeah.
So you're.
Wait. Yeah. I'll call Linda first and then Pavel. Please use the mic for your.
Sorry for prolonging the question. And before even you spoke, you talked about young people bringing small changes in their communities, whatever we can. But as we see, like as times are progressing in this chaotic world, as we have spoken so far, that scope for making change is shrinking. Like the space is shrinking for for the young people. And I would like to bring an example for that. Like we talk about the 3 R's, like recycle, the recycle regime that we have seen so far, and it's been like proven, like disproven, like so far that the recycling doesn't work, and the amount of pollution that the global petroleum industries are doing, and even the 3R advertisement is done paid for by the big oil companies. So I'm saying, like, even if we recycle, what change is it bringing if we don't first talk about the big powers and like directly address it? I'm saying, like, how much as young people we can change for just changing our behavior. Okay, I turn off my light before they're going out of the room. I'm saving some electricity. But in the grand scheme of things, like, this is something, that's why I brought the example of triple R, that it has been proven by multiple research that recycling does not help with pollution at all, or does not help at all, even if you do it at a grand, wide level scale. So in that, thinking that how do you think that even like community-based approach, like small thing that we can do in a shrinking space like that, can actually make effective change? Do you believe it? If so, like how? So that's the follow-up.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll give first the floor to Linda. Linda, can you try to speak?
Yeah, okay, so for me, talking about if young people can work in isolation, I so much believe that young people cannot work in isolation. One of the strategies we use to bridge those gaps are intergenerational dialogues, ensuring that the values are passed to the next generation. And then I didn't really get the last part of the question that you stated. Because talking about the intergenerational dialogue, we believe that the older generations can pass on and as well learn from the younger generations. That's the essence of intergenerational dialogue. And also, as young people, we can we cannot make the change we want on our own. That's why I spoke about collaboration. We need those collaboration with every group of whether the older, the younger, we need that collaboration to make that effective and sustainable change we want to see. Because as in some communities, you can't just go and make some and start some initiative without some kind of advocacy and making some kind of permissions. So as young people on our own, we cannot make the change we need. We need to collaborate. We need to learn from the older generations. And also, we need to be open. Some of us as young people, we are not open to accept the older generation. We believe we know it more. But then our older generation also do it. There is a part of at which they can help us. So we need to collaborate with the older generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Linda. Pavel, please.
Thanks, Joshua. Sorry for taking the floor again, but I felt the need to respond to this and to increase the level of optimism, maybe, on this one. Two things that we are trying to do, because I still wanted to go back to your first question, actually, about working in isolation. Impossible. I think Monica spoke about that young people are simply part of the bigger story, bigger community. They hardly find space to work just on their own. Basically, they are part of the system in terms of getting the opportunities at NGOs, international and so on. But it definitely makes sense to create special conditions, and that, for example, Jay, I think you spoke about this, that young people need to learn, need to develop the skills, need to socialize, find their networks and so on. So that's, for example, why we are still continuing with this student-driven initiative, the Prague Student Summit. There is a group of young people that are managing the whole business, doing the fundraising, reaching out to partners, and in these safe conditions, safe environment, that we try to teach them actually to create the conditions in which they could be learning actually, not being in the world itself. It can be a dangerous place, but here we're trying to create a safe conditions, a safe space, so that they can learn, develop, and then just go out of the nest and do for themselves, but to have an opportunity. And we are trying to create these opportunities. And there are other programs like that, at the UN level, at the Czech national level, the embassies are doing opportunities for young people. And I think they actually make sense. And we need to have more of this and more of this facilitated inside of the system, inside of the institutions. I think there is profound need for this. But now I wanted to be even more optimistic and say how recycling actually makes sense in this country. This is a very popular thing. People like to recycle. They love to recycle, I would say, even. And I, beyond other things, and what we discussed today, I'm actually also part, since I was 6, of Scouts, International Scout Movement, the Czech branch, and this is the fastest growing youth organization in this country that really have these kind of things, not only recycling, but also responsible way of dealing with the environment, having the sustainability at mind. And this is that young people are brought up in the system, bringing this home to their families, talking to their parents, and through this intergenerational change, actually creating an enormous leverage For example, also that the country will be adopting a new law on recycling more things than it used to be in the past. So we are even expanding this because there's so much appetite, and it's also coming from this very bottom-up initiatives and youth movements that are actually facilitating and increasing the change. And in my personal story, I was a couple of years outside the country and coming back to this, and just started following a couple of years ago now the country's discourse. You even have, and this country loves beer. You probably experience a lot here. Even on these most traditional brands, now you have recyclable parts of the etiquette on the bottles and things like that. So there is something happening along these lines. Yes, you are contrasting that with the large, oil industry and whatever. That will take time, and sometimes, as I mentioned, we need to be patient. But the bottom-up change is taking place, and it's making a huge impact on how people think and how the then country's politicians take decisions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pavel. I'm very sorry, Monica, to do this to you, but we have a number of questions in the room, and I want to accommodate maybe just two of them. I'm so sorry. Yes, I promised you the floor, and then we'll give one more. I hate this job when I have to do this. No worries. Yeah, can you try?
Am I audible to the
Monica and
digital
Linda, can you hear?
panel?
Okay, they hear
Okay,
you.
perfect. I'm sorry, but when we started, I heard the moderator talk about how we will also discuss like digital misinformation and disinformation. And please pardon me if I did not really catch that, but I did not hear much discussions regarding that. So if it would be possible to, I don't really understand the difference between digital disinformation and misinformation. If that would be, if somebody would be able to explain that, I would be honored. And also, I have a second question, and connecting that to what my friends have said about the socio-political situation sort of deteriorating, institutions becoming stronger. Digitization, internet has become very common today. Like that is, you cannot argue that. 73% of young population is chronically online, and as part of that 73% myself, what I have been noticing is that there has been a lot of systematic racism, anti-immigration sentiments, and hatred and malice that have been spreading in the internet like never before. And so, my question is, what has, especially in the EU, because immigration is a big thing here, it's a melting pot. So, what has the EU been doing specifically in order to make sure that this hatred that is online does not sort of reflect in real life? Because it is very easy to hide behind a screen and blurt out racial stuff at others, but how are we making sure that this does not reflect in real life, and also if it is possible to make digital space more safe, more secure, because whether we like it or not, internet is going to be a huge deal, even so, when we're moving forward. So yeah, that was my question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If I could request the panelists to be really brief with their response, and I think Pavel, it's a question for you. Sorry for.
I wanted to skip this round. Sorry, just very briefly. Let's discuss maybe this information. It's takes time after this panel discussion, but on the hate, I feel that we really need to discuss this. We are, or I am at least, and our institution also, we are big proponents of the digital regulation models. The EU has been quite strong on this, actually. There is something called Digital Services Act, DSA shortly, and this is actually a major tool on regulating the EU at these EU sort of model managed information ecosystem in the online space, and exactly preventing the illegal content, because hate speech is illegal. We cannot allow this. The problem then, a little bit, this is the complex environment of the European Union. You have EU level, you have national level. So very often there are EU regulations, but then implemented nationally. So then each and every one of the member states determines what is legal, what is not, what is allowed, what is not. So that's a bit chaotic situation, unfortunately, but this is definitely one of the ways forward to do more regulation and facilitate removal of the illegal content faster. Yes, there needs to be always a line drawn what is there and what is on the other side of the barricade, so to say, legal, illegal. But of course, the most sensitive is the first part that I would prefer to discuss later, the gray zone, disinformation. Sort of, they call it legal, harmful, but legal. So something that can cause harm, but you are allowed to say. It's not actually illegal and should not be put down immediately. So there are things like that. It's a very turbulent and dynamic discussion, but yeah, it's a very interesting one, and we love to engage. We actually do have projects now nationally, but also hopefully soon at the EU level on this. So happy to discuss this later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pavel. I'll request Monica to take the floor, and then we'll. We can do it later. Sorry, we're pressed for time. I'm really sorry. Monica, you will take the floor, and then Fabio will have his question. Thank you.
Just very quickly, just say that one with Pavel about regulation, but I think another very important thing to consider, and I'm also speaking from the point of view of my country. We need more education on digital behavior and on this digitalization. Because, for example, I see younger generation being more and more present on internet, social media, whatever, which is very useful and very important. But I also see a system of structure and educative roles not being that fast. So we need more digital education because that, of course, will have more. And of course, we also have to consider another aspect, but I think I will not be too long on this. We have to remember that social media create digital bubbles. So what we consider, for example, in Italy, it has been very much a case with the last referendum. We have a lot of digital activism on social media, but that activism doesn't go beyond the bubble of people that are already interested in that. Because social media are made like that. They let you see what you want to see. So we also have to remember that. And remember that these hate bubbles reinforce themselves. So I think it's a very interesting, complex question, and I'm sure you will have time to discuss about that later. I'm sorry I'm not there. But I think these are the last 3 points I wanted to make.
Thank you, Monica. Now I pass the floor to.
So thank you, first of all, to all the panelists. I even wrote many good T-shirt ideas, like the expressions that you proposed, but I wanted to add like my 2 cents coming from the 2018 promotion or promoting class from this university, because sharing my experience when I finished this development studies program. Let's say I was still young and I had a lot of energy, and I said I still believe that I could make a change with all the knowledge that I gathered here in Europe. I'm originally from Colombia, and I have to agree with what Jose Jeronimo said. That is like, okay, you finish, you are super eager to explore how are you gonna do your contributions to the first to your country, because like your first choice. Then you can have the chance to do international organizations. But I had the luck to immerse myself into the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation. Wow, right? That's a development agency, basically. Because I had the chance to manage like 160 million euros in projects, and I was like, okay, wow, this is like a kind of a lot of money. But the problem is that what I wanted to do with my knowledge, I couldn't, because of the structures, because of the institutions, because of the checks and balances, because of the overlooking agency. So I was kind of frustrated because I had all this energy, but I couldn't make it work. It took time, and I think I'm going to use this quote from James Bond, like, hey, youth is not guarantee of innovation, but age is not guarantee of efficiency. But I will change it for patience. Like I think when I was aging working for the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, finally, when I had voice, I could make some changes. And it is fantastic what we did there, or I did, let's be honest, because in the board when we were making decisions how to create like the policy, like really like that was going to become a normative for the country. My 2 cents were not no longer 2 cents, but actually it transformed. So we managed to include more indigenous populations in our proposals. Finally, we put like the gender equality percentages to 47%, 53, which was like close to 50 at least. And we had in our, let's say, public investment proposals these nuances to take advantage of all the different regions of the country. So I couldn't do it at the first moment when I had all the energy. I had to wait a little bit until I could exploit the opportunity, as Jeronimo said, and to make change there. So to contribute to the optimistic approach, it is possible. You need a beautiful combination between keeping the energy of the youth, but don't take aging as a as a bad thing. Actually, I think it's better. That's why I like that song "Forever Young." Like it's better to age and to become more patient and actually more sophisticated in your decisions. So that's what I wanted to say. So no questions. Sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Fabio. And of course, there's no other way to conclude this much rich discussion that we're having. I encourage everyone to connect, to continue the discussions. I'm sorry for those who weren't able to entertain their questions or follow up questions, but there will be a short break at the foyer with coffee, so continue your discussions there. And there will be a book launch or a book discussions by Prof. Ban Sengtan from Ashoka University. It's the book is entitled "International Aid and Democracy Promotion, Liberalization at the Margins," published in 2020 by Routledge. So this book argues that we should take both the reluctance of Western donors to promote political reform and the pushback by recipients seriously. So it will be in this same room. We'll have 10 minutes of break, yeah, or 15 minutes of coffee break. But please, everyone, let's take this chance to thank Linda, Monica, Jay, Aruj, and Pavo for their time.
And Joshua, to you.
Thank you. Oh, worries. I try my best. Linda and Monica, thank you so much for your participation. Yeah, we'll connect with you, okay? Linda, thank you, Linda.
Linda and Monica, thank you very much. I don't know whether you see me or not. Stand perhaps the other way around, but then I don't see you. So thank you very much for making it happen and to connecting to us from different places. And I'm extremely happy that also the technology did not work against us this time and you were able to stay the whole time with us. I would wish to invite you also to have a sip of coffee with us. So at least please have a sip of coffee, thinking of the entire group here. And I believe this is not the last time that we meet, and we will follow up and discuss the things that you have started to open also throughout of your contributions. Thank you so much, and I'm really, really happy that we could have made it happen. Yeah.
Thank you for thinking about
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
You learn about counterproductive of every start with what we just did here.
So much that I every day.
Yes.
And
Yeah. Honestly, now if it's one of the reasons that I try to much. And we It's really, it's like #1 now. Like,
It should be, but
yeah,
you know,
it's
because
crazy.
it's just that we underestimate power of friendship.
Yeah, it's like so some of these people,
But I want to ask you,
that's really great. Thank you
we
so much.
actually
Thank you so much.
film recently, but then it decided to do with the statistics. So,
Oh, that's
we
good.
got even got the theory kind of questions. So, who's there any plans?
Thank you so much for
Thank you so much for bringing
Sorry for I was just discussing this like urgent need to come back to the
Once again, we have your attention, please. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to hear from Professor Ban Seng Tan, who will discuss his book, International Aid and Democracy Promotion, Liberalization at the Margins. This book was published by Routledge in 2020. Mr. Ban Seng Tan is an assistant professor of political science and international relations at Ashoka University in India. Professor Tan's book investigates the linkages between foreign aid and the promotion of democracy using theory, statistical tests, and illustrative case studies. His book challenges the field of development to recognize that democracy promotion is unlike other development goals. After Professor Tan's discussion, we will open the floor for questions and comments from the audience. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor Tan.
Thank you. So can I just do a voice projection? Can those people at the back, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Right? So I'm just going to test this to make sure it's working. Okay. Okay, great. So good afternoon. My name is Ban Seng Tan, as Joshua has kindly introduced me. So I was here last week because there was a European Association for Taiwan Studies at Paleki, and the host at GLODEP was kind enough to invite me to give a book talk, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. Now, I'm aware that I'm speaking to you, and a lot of you have a developmental background, so you roughly know there are different types of foreign aid. The most common type of foreign aid is called developmental aid, right? So that should be familiar to you. Now, this book is talking about something else. It's talking about something called democracy aid. So it's a subset of foreign aid where the Western donors give it to typically authoritarian aid recipients for the purpose of conducting governance-related reforms. So reforms like what? The holding of multi-party election, release of political prisoners, the training in people in the rule of law, that kind of aid. So this is the topic of this particular book. We are clear, right? And I'm going to speak for about 30 minutes, and then hopefully I'm going to cover the theory, the argument, the methods, and I'm going to have to be brief about the methods due to the time constraint. I'm going to cover the case studies. So whatever that you are interested in during the slides and so on, you can ask me during the Q&A. I will be happy to address them. Okay. So this book is, in a sense, released in a very difficult times in international relations. I characterize this era as the era of resurgent authoritarianism and feckless democracy. Autocrats, as you know, are doing everything to undermine the liberal international order. But that is to be expected. That's what I expect autocrats to do, right? What is rather disappointing is that the Democrats, the people who profess to defend liberal democracy, they are doing such a terrible job at it. So this book is not going to solve all the problems with liberal democracy, but I do argue that if you follow some of the prescriptions in this book, it will buy us some time. So my hope is to persuade you with this book that democracy promotion is something that is possible, right? It's just that we have to be pretty strategic in the way we go about this. Okay. So let's get to it. Now, when I present a book like this, argument like this, effectively I'm talking a little bit about US foreign policy. And there's already in the public a widespread perception about US foreign policy. Namely, is this idea that the United States say they want to promote democracy, but in practice, they don't really do it. So the typical charge is the charge of the hypocrisy of US foreign policy. I need you to be clear. This book is not about US foreign policy and the hypocrisy of the US foreign policy. I'm not interested in critical security studies. I'm not here to criticize US foreign policy. Rather, in this book, I take the donors as they are, and I try to carve out a way towards democracy promotion. I recognize that the hands of cards that I have been dealt with is a very weak pair of hands. What I'm trying to do is to play the cards as effectively, as strategically as possible in the direction of democracy promotion. I hope that's clear, right? Okay. Oh, so that reminds me. So this is a quote by Joe Biden in 2021. So this was the context of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. And even as you can tell from this quote, the United States, despite what they say, they are very clear. There are limits on how much they are willing to commit to democracy. So it's democracy, yes, but not at every price. So I hope that point, this particular quote makes it clear. Okay, so let's get to it. I basically want to know how the aid donors, the ones with the money. Choose among 8 recipients, the ones who need the money, whom to apply diplomatic pressure to. And the reason why I care about the first question is because I believe that if we can understand the dynamics of donor to aid recipient bargaining, right, we can use that aspect to now influence or push certain countries towards democracy. That is to say, the question 1 is my instrumental question, and I only want to answer that because question 2, which is my thematic question, is the main question that this book is trying to address. And what is my argument? I claim that we should be very selective about what type of aid recipients we give the aid to. There should be a set of aid recipients that lack the strategic and commercial attributes that renders them more vulnerable to donor pressure. So this is the group of aid recipients that should be more suitable or more amenable to donor pressure and more likely to liberalize once you give democracy aid to them. So let me elaborate now, right? So the next question obviously is the so what question. Why should you care about this research? Well, there are several reasons. The first one is practical. I solve problems that donors have, right? Look at it this way. When the donors give money to the aid recipients, that money could potentially represent a bonus income to the recipient government. So if I'm a recipient government and I'm strategic, I may have plans or I may bluff the donors to say, I promise to do A, B, C, D, but what I'm really interested in is in the money. So after receiving the money, I may not do it. So if you look at it from the viewpoint of the donors, surely it's really effective or important to the donors, a priori, before you give the money, if they can separate out between the aid recipients who are sincere. They say they want to liberalize. After taking the money, they will actually do it. From the aid recipients who are engaged in what we call cheap talk. They say they do it, but they are not interested in doing it at all. And from the donor's point of view, obviously you will want this information before you give the money. I hope that makes sense, right? Now, the other point is that this book comes out with a filter. So the filter to demarcate the recipients, and that filter is empirical, is quantitative. I happen to apply this to state-to-state bargaining in foreign aid. But conceptually, the framework and the filter can be applied to other types of state-to-state bargaining outside of foreign aid. So, for example, IMF negotiation over debt restructuring and so on. But I'm just telling you that the framework can be applied to outside context, outside of foreign aid. Okay? So, now I'm going to talk about the theory, the arguments. I'm going to present to you from the donor's point of view, followed by the recipient point of view. So let's talk about the donor's point of view. Right? For the layperson, when they think about foreign aid, they typically assume that the donors are motivated by altruistic reasons. That means you need the money, I feel sorry for you, therefore I offer you some money. However, we know from empirical studies of foreign aid, that means those that are backed by quantitative data, donors have many, many objectives beside altruism. For example, donors can give aid for strategic consideration. Think of United States aid for 30 years to Egypt under Hussein Mubarak. United States is basically buying Egypt's compliance with the Camp David peace accord with Israel. So you're buying peace. That's what the aid is buying. Donors can also give aid for commercial reasons. Think of Chinese aid to selected African countries that happen to be rich in the oil and mineral resources that the Chinese economy happens to desperately need. You can do a Google search. It's called the Angola model. Right? Or you can have donors that are interested in democratization. The only claim I make here, and this is the one that's supported by the empirics of the data, the only claim here is that there's a ranking of hierarchies. Whenever, generally speaking, donors are far more interested in the strategic and commercial attributes far more than they should seek democratization. So they sometimes do seek democratization, but it's typically not the top priority. You are clear? Okay. So even if the donors should be so lucky as to find an aid recipient, even if we should be so lucky as to get donors who are interested in democratization, it doesn't mean that the recipient will automatically comply. Why? Because the recipient are strategic actors. They are thinking things through. So you look at it from the authoritarian point of view, from the authoritarian aid recipient. The donors want democracy. They want multi-party election. They want the release of political prisoners. Every single one of these political reforms from the authoritarian point of view is politically painful. Think about it. Which self-respecting autocrats will voluntarily give up power if they can help it? So from their point of view, there are basically 3 responses they can take. So they're under pressure to receive aid. They have to implement all this reform. So there are three possible responses. The first response is that they could walk away. But if they walk away, they lose access to the money. So from the autocrat's point of view, this is not exactly a good outcome, right? Because they have no access to the money. The other option is that they can turn around, the recipient can turn around and make a grand bargain with the donors. What the recipient is basically saying, hey, I happen to have this access to strategic concessions and this access to commercial concessions, which I can offer it to the donors in exchange for the aid and in lieu of democratization. So I get the money, I give you something else, but I do not democratize. Now, the third response of the recipient is that they reject the Western demands for democratization and they turn around, they shop around, they look for alternative donors. The issue is that if you turn around and look for alternative donors, the catch is to realize that you still have to offer something that is attractive enough to the alternative donors. So effectively, the third response reduces, for the purpose of this presentation, to a variant of the second response. So the book now is going to focus mostly on the second response, this idea of a grand bargain. So I understand that the argument I just presented is a bit abstract. So in the book, I have a case study, two case studies of Egypt and Fiji, where I use them as a motivating example to illustrate what I'm talking about. So sorry, can you help me with this? Do I just click away? I'm sorry about this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so just to recap, in 2013, there was a military coup. The Egyptian military overthrew the elected government of the Muslim Brotherhood. This is in Egypt. In 2006, there was another military coup. This was in the case of Fiji, where the Fijian military overthrew the civilian government. What I want you to notice is the way the donors react to the same setback in democracy. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but a long time ago, before Trump, right, there was an act of Congress. Under the act of Congress, if the United States offer a foreign aid to a given aid recipient, and that aid recipient undergoes a military coup, by law, the United States have to suspend all aid to that given country until that country returns to democracy. So there's a setback. The law is very clear. The US should do something. In the case of Fiji, the United States have no problem cutting off all foreign aid to Fiji, imposing sanctions on Fiji, demanding a return to democracy. That's fine. The US is just following its own laws. What you want to pay attention is what happened in the case of Egypt. After the coup, the White House refused to put any meaningful pressure upon Egypt. Now you want to think about it. Why? It's the same law. The short version here is that you want to think in terms of the importance of Egypt to the United States. Egypt is an important security ally in the Middle East for the United States. It's so important to the United States that the US doesn't want to jeopardize its security alliance in the pursuit of democracy. So there's a ranking of priorities. Now, just to give you a sense of this, the United States typically offer $1.2 billion annually in terms of economic aid to Egypt. This is the Camp David Peace Accord deals, right? The White House hinted at cutting off those aid. Precisely because Egypt is an important player, it turned to alternative donors. In this case, it turned to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, UAE. Collectively, the two countries promised about $12 billion worth of aid. 12 billion, 10 times whatever the United States is offering. In fact, the King of Saudi Arabia went on record saying, if the United States dare to cut off aid to Egypt, Saudi Arabia will promise to match the lost aid dollar for dollar. So in this kind of situation, it's really difficult for, at that time, the president in charge was Obama. It's very difficult for him to put any meaningful pressure on Egypt. Because even if you put pressure on them, they are important. They can easily find an alternative source of funding to secure, right? So the White House knows this. That's why they didn't want to put that much pressure on Egypt, because you're not going to achieve your goals anyway. In fact, this was interesting. During the New York Times, right, there was this article because the White House was reluctant to call what happened in Egypt a coup, right? So I remember the New York Times had this headline. The headline was, when is a coup not a coup, right? Because the moment you call it a coup, you are legally obligated to suspend aid to Egypt, which the White House doesn't want to do. So they deny there was a coup because they want to avoid it, right? Now you pay attention to Fiji. Because Fiji wasn't that important, neither commercially or strategically important to Fiji, the White House has no problem putting all the sanctions, applying the law against Fiji. Now the Fijians, like every other recipient, try to look for alternative donors. So they adopted what they call a look north foreign policy. Look north to where? China. The top leadership all flew to China asking for a grand bounty of foreign aid from China. They expected billions of dollars of aid. And in fact, what they got was about 1 or 2 million, a tiny fraction. Why? For the same reason that Fiji is not important to the United States, Fiji is also not that important to China. That is to say, the Chinese didn't see Fiji as important enough to pay a huge amount in foreign aid. So in other words, it's not for the lack of trying. The certain types of recipients lack the ability to bargain enough for foreign aid, and therefore they are more vulnerable to pressure coming from the West. Okay. What does this mean? This means that now the examples is now highlighting two ideal types of recipient. One group of recipients, they have leverage, they have bargaining power, and they think of them, if you like, you can think of this as the Egypts of the aid recipient world. So for the purpose of subsequent analysis, because I have to do statistics and it, in the book, I'm going to call them primary recipient. It's just a label to highlight the important players. Think of this as the Egypts of the aid recipient world. There's another group of recipients, they lack leverage, they lack bargaining power. Again, for the purpose of statistical analysis, I'm going to call them the secondary recipients, right? Think of this as the Fijis of the aid recipient world. And my claim here is that when you put donor pressure on the secondary recipient, it's more likely to lead to subsequent liberalization because these guys lack the ability to push back. They don't have that much to bargain with. However, if you put the donor pressure on the primary recipient, precisely because they are in the position to push back, the aid in this in the second situation should have statistically meaningless. That means it's a random effect. It doesn't really affect the outcome of the primary recipient. Now, the book has multiple other hypotheses, but these are the two big ones in the book. So, now that you understand this, I'm just going to spend some time talking about the methods. So if you think about my hypothesis, right, I need two types of information. I need information on foreign aid and I need information on regime type. What I do is I build a data set that combines the two types of information. For the information on foreign aid, I need the donor's intention. So this is from aid data 2.1. And for the information on regime characteristics of the aid recipient, I get this from the polity data set. So when I combine together, I now have a panel data from 1973 to 2006 that captures the information about the type of aid, the donor's intention with the aid, and the recipient's regime type, all in the same data set. So what do I do with this information? Well, take note of my argument. My argument is not deterministic. I'm not saying that every time you apply donor pressure on the secondary recipient, voila, you're going to get democracy. That's way too strong. My argument is probabilistic. What I'm saying is that when you apply donor pressure on the secondary recipient, it's more likely to be successful than when you apply it on the primary recipient. So this is a probabilistic argument. The correct way to do this is a statistical analysis. So I use regression models and analysis for country panel data with country fixed effects. The reason why I use country fixed effects is because I'm trying to control for idiosyncratic variation that are unique to each country domestic situation. I'm focusing on the international effect of aid, not the country's domestic situation. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the variables. So I have a couple of slides for the one for independent variable and about one for dependent variable and 3 for the independent variable. So this is a dependent variable, right? So to measure information on regime characteristics, political science. So many political scientists use a particular data set known as the polity project. So the polity project gives multiple institutional characteristics. I'm going to skip all the operationalization, but the key point is we usually work with the composite regime index, which is a score from -10 to +10. If a country at a given year score +6 and above, that's usually considered a democracy. A country that scores below that is typically considered a non-democratic regime. So what happens? I take the aid recipient, I measure what is his polity score at a given year. After he has received aid, I check what happens to the polity score 5 years later. If the value has increased, then I consider the aid recipient to be liberalizing. If the value has decreased, then I consider the recipient to be heading in an authoritarian direction. That means it's losing democracy. Now let me talk about the one of my first independent variable. So I need a measurement of how much the donors have put pressure upon the aid recipient. So the first step is that I turn to aid data 2.1, which is a data set, and it measures different aid projects, the main economic sector the aid project is directed at. And in the jargon is known as a purpose code. So there are multiple different types of purpose code. I'm focusing on democracy aid. And I'm measuring whether in the given year the aid recipient has received democracy aid project, yes or no. So it's a binary indicator. And I'm treating this as a proxy variable. That means if the value is 1, yes, it has received democracy aid, I assume it is under donor pressure. Now, why do I do that? Just walk with me. Let me guide you through the thinking process. Imagine I'm an authoritarian aid recipient. You are the Western donor. If you give me some money for, developmental aid to develop a road project, I want to develop the same road project as you. So the fact that I receive your money doesn't indicate you give me any pressure because I share the same objective as you. Democracy aid is different. You are asking me to do something I don't want to do. So the fact that I received democracy aid from you implies that there was some amount of arm twisting. You forced me to take this aid with this set of conditions, knowing that these conditions are actually somewhat painful for me. So therefore, it becomes a proxy indicator that donor pressure was exerted from me. Keep in mind, if I'm really unhappy with this pressure, I could have just walked away from the deal, right? So this slide is now showing you multiple sub-indices to measure the recipient salience. So salience is this idea, how important the recipient is to the donors in general. There's a lot going on in this slide. Now, if I have a lot of time, that means if I was to give a 40-minute talk, I will go over the exact operationalization of each and every one of these indicators. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that, right? So I'm just going to give you the big picture here, and I will give you a teaching example to illustrate what is it I'm trying to do here. So essentially, to capture information on commercial value, that means how important the donor is economically to all, how important the recipient is economically to all donors. I'm capturing information on the import and exports and the size of the GDP of the aid recipient. To capture information on the strategic value of the recipients to all donors, I'm capturing information on the geographical distance, information on the population size of the recipient, as well as their state preferences. This one is operationalized in the UN General Assembly roll call votes. So there are different 6 subcomponents. What I do, the first thing I do is that I standardize them. Once you standardize them, it's easier to compare. And then I impose a cutoff point to say that above this cutoff point is important. And then finally, if a aid recipient has passed, right, is in the top 25%, for example, for commercial value, and is in the top 25% for strategic value, that means it has both strategic and commercial value, I will consider this to be a primary recipient. If it doesn't, then it will be considered to be a secondary recipient. Now, I skip a lot of the operationalization. Here's one of the teaching examples. Imagine a wealthy donor comes to Palaki University. He has a sum of money. He says, okay, I want to set up a scholarship fund for the top students in Palaki. So what does the dean do? The dean now have to select students from, let's say, the natural sciences and from the social sciences. Now, there are different courses, right? Like, for example, economics, history, political science, physics, chemistry, and so on. Some people will argue an A in a history class is not the same as an A in a physics class. So you need to standardize the distribution of grades. And then your dean will have to now impose a cutoff point saying, if you score in the top 10%, this is a good student, right? It's arbitrary, of course, but most people use cutoff points to determine what is good, what is not bad, right? So it's the same logic. And then if the student do well in the top 10% of the natural sciences and the top 10% of the social sciences, that student is considered the best student, right? Same concept. It's just that I'm using different indicators, but it's the same logic. Okay, now that's clear. So this is the main table, and I promise this is the main, there's only one table, right? So here, my argument is that the recipient status, when you apply donor pressure in terms of democracy aid, the result, the status will systematically affect the subsequent liberalization. So that means this is what we call a conditional argument, which means that now there are 3 independent variables. The first independent variable is the recipient status. The second independent variable is the donor pressure, whether you receive democracy aid or not. And then there's a third independent variable, which is the interaction term of the three of them. So forgive me now, I'm just going to walk out and just show you, right? So what you are going to see now is the primary recipient and the secondary recipient. What happens when you don't put pressure? What happens when you put pressure? And the change here is the change in the aid recipient coefficient sign. That means 5 years later after the receipt of aid. What this table is showing you is that if you don't put pressure on the primary recipient, they drop by 0.71, less than 1 quality point. But if you put pressure, it actually gets worse. They lose even more democracy, right? But on this table, right, this is the one that I want you to pay attention to. When you don't put pressure, they naturally improve, but this is a fraction of 1, right? Whereas if you do put pressure, it increases by 0.6. Now, these are what the data is showing. The key question is being answered by this column. This column is asking the question, are the results you see, the two of them, the two pairs of results, are these statistically significant for each other? Because if they are, that means my framework is systematically distinguishing between the primary and the secondary recipient. And you can do this with a simple F-test. So the F-test is showing that the probability that this is driven by chance alone is 0.003, which means that it's less than 1% chance this is random, that this is statistically significant. What's the claim? The claim is that when you put donor pressure on the primary recipient, it doesn't work. But when you put it on the secondary recipient, it is working. That means the framework is able to distinguish between the two types of recipient. Think about the dean. The dean has to separate between the top students and the weak student, right? Is his framework systematically separating between the two equilibrium? Okay? Yeah. So what have I just presented to you? This is a list of the chapter outline. I've just presented to you the theory, which is chapter 1, and I presented to you the analysis, the global analysis, which is chapter 2. Now, for those of you who are quantitatively orientated, there's chapter 3 and 4, where I do additional analysis. Chapter 3 is when I take the composite index of salience and I disaggregate it to see which specific component variable may have greater impact. The economic variable seems to be more important to donors in general. In chapter 4, I do this on the regional context. That is to say, I take the framework, I apply this to Africa, and I apply this to Asia. Not many people know this, but these two regions basically account for the majority of foreign aid in the world anyway, right? And that I was able to find evidence that is able to work very strongly from Africa and less so for Asia. But in the case of Asia, I was able to use second-order effects in order to determine the relationship. So these are the empirical information. Now, chapter 5 and 6 are the case studies. I've already discussed the case study for the Egypt and Fiji. So think of what is Egypt? Egypt is an example of a primary recipient. It has leverage. It can push back. Fiji is an example of a secondary recipient. It tries to push back, but it's not very effective in doing so. Then there's the example of Myanmar, which I'm going to talk about this. And then in the conclusion, I talk about the policy prescription, which in the interest of time, I don't really discuss right now, but I can answer during the Q&A. So, given my audience, I thought it would be interesting to just briefly talk about the case of Myanmar. So, let's talk a little bit about Myanmar, right? And by the way, when I say Myanmar, I use the word Burma and Myanmar interchangeably, right? So, it's just a name, right? So, what is the case? Myanmar is a case of a country with moderate salience. It's not a primary recipient, it's not a secondary recipient, it's as a mix. And that what happened in Myanmar, it was that after the 8888 incident is the name of a particular time when the Tatmadaw, which is the Burmese army, opened fire on the pro-democracy protesters, where they basically crushed the pro-democracy movement. And the Western donors basically imposed sanctions on Myanmar. And the Burmese authorities felt that, so what? Even if the West cut off aid to me, I can turn to China. So they turned to China for economic aid, for patronage. So the question becomes, if the Burmese turn to the Chinese for economic aid, in response to in response to Western donor pressure, I call this phenomenon donor switching. Donor switching is when an aid recipient try to play one donor group against the other, typically the West with whatever, China and so on, right? So I'm trying to understand the dynamics of donor switching. At first glance, you think that just because Burma can find China, therefore Burma is now safe. It has leverage against the West. And I'm trying to get you to understand, and my argument here is maybe not. Bear with me here, right? So I'm going to give you an example, and this is an example from the economic sanctions literature. This is from political science. Due to the war in Ukraine, Russia traditionally sell oil and energy to Europe, right? After the war, what happens? The West put sanctions on Russia, so Russia cannot sell to the West. And the Russians basically thought, it's fine. I will sell it to the East. I will sell it to China and India. Just think about it. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, the per barrel price of oil that the West is willing to pay, and it's just a hypothetical example. Let's say it's $60 per barrel. That's the Western price. When the Russians turn to the Chinese and the Indians, they say, okay, I want to sell you the same oil for $60. Will the Indians and the Chinese accept this? No. They argue, you cannot sell it to the West. We are your only market now. So therefore, we have more leverage over the Russians. And what the Indians and the Chinese did was to extract a discount on the oil that is sold. So for example, $40, which means that every time when the Russians sell 60 minus 40, they are basically losing $20, right? So what does this mean? This is measured by this blue arrow to represent that the Chinese and the Indian side, they recognize they have an increase in leverage over the Russians who are trying to switch between two customers. So they use their increased leverage to extract more price, in this case, a price discount over the oil. You understand the concept, right? So now, let's turn it to our case study. So in our case study, the West put pressure on Burma. The Burmese responded by now responding to China. Sooner or later, the Chinese, as a rational actor, realized they have more leverage over Burma because the Burmese are now under Western sanction. So the question becomes, what would the Chinese do with their increased leverage? What kind of extra concessions would they get from Burma? So in the case study, I talk about some of the things that the Chinese extracted from the Burmese. I'm going to be quick about this. The first one is that the Chinese intervened into the peace talk between the Burmese government and some of the ethnic groups in the Sino-Burmese region. So that means they interfere in the domestic affairs of Burma. And I promise you, the Burmese government is not happy about this, right? And then the second point was over a hydroelectric dam project, where the Chinese side forced the Burmese side to build the dam project over extensive popular protests by the Burmese people. Eventually, the project was cancelled because the protest was getting a bit too much, right? And then finally, there was an economic penetration. In fact, the Chinese economic penetration of Burma was so extensive that the entire Burmese economy was described as an adjunct economy of Yunnan. Yunnan is the province in China that's just next to Burma, right? And again, the top junta leadership is not happy about this, right? These concessions are painful to the leadership. So the question becomes, if you don't like the pressure coming from China, what can Burma do? Well, according to the argument, you could switch back to the United States. Now, because Burma isn't that important to the United States, the only main concession that's valuable to the Americans is democratization. So from about 2008 to 2015, the junta came under Western pressure, and what the junta did was a whole series of quick political reforms, culminating in 2015, the general election, when the National League for Democracy under then Aung San Suu Kyi actually won. And the junta returned back to politics. That means the junta returned back to barracks, and Burma became somewhat democratic. Keep in mind, my case study stops at 2015, right? So, what am I trying to get you to understand? There are limits to donor switching. Just because you are able to find an alternative doesn't mean you have the leverage. Simply because your alternative supplier, they are rational actors, they recognize their own leverage, and they may use the leverage to secure more concessions from you. And those concessions can be spectacularly painful, which means that donor switching, in my argument, cuts both ways, right? It's not just a case of the recipient gaming the system, trying to play one donor against another. Sometimes the donors play back against the recipient. So this is something that you should also pay attention to. Okay, now my next point here, right? And this is one of my final slides. So George Orwell is a famous author. I don't think I need to introduce him. The point here is that many aid recipients need aid. They need developmental aid, but not all recipients are equal. You really should filter the recipients according to their salience, which means that applied to democracy, if you want to advance democracy, you should be focusing on the aid recipients that lack the leverage. In my jargon, this is called a secondary recipient, which means that if you have limited resources, and now the foreign aid industry is somewhat in crisis, so there's always a limit on resources, you should be targeting those aid recipients that don't have the ability to push back. And for those recipients, you are more likely to be successful. Now, I hope I have persuaded you that at least democracy aid, there can be a strategy, there can be a way forward. And I hope I have persuaded you to pay more attention to the arguments of this book. So if you would like to have this book, is on open access. The web link is here. You can email me. I'm happy to just email you the link for this book. It's on open access. What it means is that I'm not getting paid for this, right? So now, okay, yeah. So yeah. So I'm happy to take questions from you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Professor Dan. Okay, we have first question. Sorry. So
yeah.
Thank you, Professor Bang. I have a little, let's say, quick curiosity regarding the link that you make between the polity, like the democratization levels from +10, -10, and the received aid. Because probably you describe this in your operationalization or referring to other chapters, because for me it's a little bit hazy. How do you create like this cause effect, like, okay, the levels of democratization increase by the increased number of foreign aid or development aid?
Yeah.
Because as we all know, development aid can be earmarked for specific projects, or can be focused in a specific sector. So for me, like how do you, methodologically speaking, create this link between aid and the levels of the liberalization?
Sure. Do you want me to answer now or collect questions or what? Sure. Can I answer now since I'm okay? So let me check this because I think there's one slide where I talk a little bit. Oh no, it's not here, right? So let me here. Let me find the slides. So this is the African one. Yeah. Okay. So in the chapter 2, I also try to methodologically account for alternative argument. A very prominent alternative argument is the argument about reverse causality. The claim here is this: I give aid, then the country liberalize. What happens if the donors don't know who to give and they pick a country that was already liberalizing anyway, right? So that this is what we call reverse causality. That means the country was already becoming a democracy, then it tends to attract more aid. So in this alternative argument, it's democracy that's driven the aid, not the aid driven the democracy. So to account for reverse causality, in one of my regression models, I put a control for the different type of regimes. I took out all the regimes that were already liberalizing anyway. Since they were not reforming, let's say 5 years before, there's no way for the donors to anticipate that this country is already liberalizing. And I rerun the analysis again. After I rerun the analysis, I still found the statistically meaningful relationship in my direction. So I know, at least in this aspect, that reverse causality is not the reason why it's not the reason for the results that we see. That's the first one, right? So there's one more. I hope I can. Oh no, it's not here. I'm not sure if I got this on this slide, right? So there's one where I talk a little bit about the Cold War. Yeah, here. So also the other alternative argument is the argument of the Cold War. The basic, this is not my argument. This is Ted Dunning's argument. So what he found was that during the Cold War, the West is very reluctant to put pressure on the aid recipients because they know that if they put too much pressure on the aid recipients to return to democracy, the same aid recipient can easily turn to the Soviet Union for aid, right? And they will lose a client state to the other side. So because of this, during the Cold War, the West didn't want to put too much pressure because they don't want to lose a client state. So during the Cold War context, a lot of the donor pressure is a lot weaker. And his claim, Dunning's claim, is that after the Cold War context, because the Soviet Union collapsed, there was no more alternative supplier. So for a very short period of time, the West became a lot more aggressive about putting pressure on the same recipient. And during the period after the Cold War, the donor pressure was basically very effective because the recipients had nobody else to go to except the West. And in order to do that, they have to meet the Western conditions. So this is the Cold War context. Now, when I apply for both the Cold War and reverse causality, I do find that it makes a difference. But again, like I said, the theory does suggest that the Cold War makes a difference. So in a harsher Cold War context, it was harder to apply this theory. But I just want to remind you the Cold War is over, right? Yeah.
Thank you for this presentation. The topic is really interesting. But keeping in mind all the assumptions of this study and the idea of democracy promotion and aid, I'm very curious about the implications and the policy recommendations.
Yeah.
Specifically, what I can interpret very directly from the brief overview, it seems like the secondary states would be more effective for the agenda of democracy promotion.
Yeah.
But I am also curious because the primary states seem to be more pertinent in the international sphere.
Yeah.
So, what is your take in general on this?
Sure. My concern was that given a limited resources that can be devoted to democracy aid, and given the fact that the donors themselves don't value democracy as much as they value all the economic and strategic concessions they can extract for the recipient. That means I'm not living in a world where the Western donors themselves are 100% committed to democracy. They are committed to maximizing whatever profit they want, and whatever is left over, they will allocate to democracy. So because of that, I suggest that they should focus on the secondary recipient. When I present this, I don't always speak to the policymakers, but sometimes when I do speak to policymakers, in the chapter 7, I hinted that the policymakers are not happy about this. And the reason why they are not happy about this is because they are a bureaucrat. So you look at it from the bureaucrat point of view. I want for a given sum of money to persuade a country to democratize. All other things being equal, I want that country to be important. Because if I manage to get an important country to democratize, it looks really good to my supervisor. It ensures that I will be promoted, right? So my point is, for the primary recipients, these are the big fish. You can aim for the big fish. But keep in mind, the big fish, the leadership of the big fish, they know they are important. And they are actively pushing back using whatever resources, let's say a strategic location, access to a military base for the US to land their Predator drones and so on, or access famously the Chinese market and so on. So they know they can use their leverage to push back. So the claim here is, for a given sum of money, you could have persuaded several secondary recipients, or you can try to persuade one primary recipient, and it's probably going to fail. Right? Not because of a lack of trying, but because the primary recipient, because they are autocrats, they don't want to democratize. So they will do everything to resist democratization, which, again, this is what I expect them to do. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Will be the next one.
Thank you so much. My name is Syed Samir Hussain, and I have just graduated from Global Development Policy, the master's program. I have questions regarding the statistical model and the identification methodology.
Okay.
So we are actually seeing an intervention of the aid. And after that, we are seeing the quality score. So isn't it necessary to see how the quality score is behaving after the intervention of the aid? What was the trend of the, let's say in very simple language, how was the state of the democracy before the intervention? How was it behaving? So that we can isolate the effect of the intervention, which is the donation. And then I want to add that the model is looking for the results after 5 years of the donation. So how is the model controlling for the events that are happening in these 5 years? Let's say an emergence of a new political party. So is the model controlling for that? Because the model is using country-specific fixed effects, but it does not control for within-country effects. So if that is how I got it correct.
Sure. So I guess I have to go back to this one. It doesn't exactly answer you, but the closer ones is here. Give me a moment. Let me get the thing, right? So, yeah, this one. I think this is the slide. So, as you know, quality score only measure annual data, right? No matter how much aid project a given country receive, there's only one quality score for that year. So that there's a multiple aid projects, but it's basically one country score. So therefore, the nature of the data is a country year data. So your point is, what happens if why 5 years, and then what happens if there's a change in 3 years? What happens if there's a change in between the 5 years? So in the analysis, initially I use as a robustness check 1 year after aid commitment, 2 years after aid commitment, and the one that I'm reporting here is 5 years after aid commitment. I include 1 year and 2 years more or less as a robustness check. But keep in mind the nature of my argument. I'm not talking about regime change by force, which can be very fast. I'm talking about regime change by persuasion. So because we are talking about slow regime change, even if the country wants to democratize, usually you have to give some time for the system to work out, like let's say how to hold a multi-party elections and so on. So that's why I use a cutoff point of 5. So that means in the robustness checks, I include year 1 and year 3. The one that I report was year 5. Now, what happens if there's a change between, let's say, year 3 and I'm using a year 5 indicator? Then you are correct. If there's a change in year 3 and I'm using the year 5 indicator, I don't capture the in-between. That means the 5-year cutoff point is not granular enough to capture the 3-year information. So that's the price I have to pay by using a longer cutoff point. And I explain, when I use a longer cutoff point, it's because regime change, again, we're talking about peaceful change, not violent one. Peaceful change usually takes some time. Yeah.
I will follow up on that. Like you mentioned, the idea is to have peaceful regime change. As you might remember that. So what I understood from the presentation, that your theory basically argues that democracy aid induces political liberalization in those countries where they don't have much to offer, basically.
Yeah.
So my question is, how do you distinguish between the genuine liberalization from tactical cosmetic liberalization? That's one question. And how do you confidently attribute these changes to aid rather than prior elite coalition or elite incentive, or donor selection bias, specifically given the absence of a counterfactual analysis here? So that's my question.
Sure. I'm going to rephrase your question and check me if I'm wrong, right? I think your first question was how do I know this is I'm sorry, maybe I lost track of your question, right? So the first question was, how do I know this is due to democracy aid as opposed to due to domestic political setting? Is that correct?
Yes. Basically, I'm asking how do you distinguish between general
Okay, I got it.
Liberalization and tactical or
Yeah.
cosmetic.
So in the literature, there's a distinction between consolidation of democracy and political liberalization. So you notice the word I'm using is actually the variable I'm using is actually political liberalization as opposed to democratization. So what do I mean by, in terms of the polity data set, right? Well, what we are actually talking about is 1 to 3 point change in the composite regime index in a democratic direction. I deliberately avoided using democratization because it's a much stronger threshold. Now, the data is pointing towards political liberalization, not democratization. What it means is that if you try to persuade an aid recipient, a secondary aid recipient, to hold multi-party election, they are willing to do it. But there's no guarantee that the multi-party election will hold and the regime will remain consolidated as a democracy. Frequently, what happens is that after they acquire the superficial trappings of democracy, they backslide. They lose their democratic setting. Usually a dictator come back to power or there's a military coup attempt again. Now, is that ideal? No. But it does reflect the commitments of the donors. Like I said, I need to emphasize this again, right? So let me just show you this slide one more time. Here. It's a reflection of the world we are in. And what is this world? The donors, the Western donors, especially the Western donor, they say they want democratization, but when the chips are down, it's almost always a secondary priority. It's almost never the top priority. So it's a reflection of the political will. There's an absence of political will in the West to push for genuine democratization. There is only some political will to push for political liberalization. So like I said, it's a weak hand of cards. I'm just trying to play the cards as best as possible in the direction of democracy. Is this what I want? No. But this is the best way, I argue, based on the data to advance the cause of democracy. It's a reflection of we, the people, not committing to democracy. Blame them, right?
Can I have a follow-up on this?
You set the tone?
So, because I would want your expert opinion on this, since you talked about Fiji, I would want to talk about some other countries. For example, would you classify countries like Rwanda or Uganda as high salience or low salience country? And in my understanding, if they are low salience country, why are we seeing political liberalization in a downward trend in countries like Rwanda, for example. And we are saying not political liberalization, we can say that authoritarian consolidation is going on the upward trend in countries like that. So how would you characterize that? That is my question.
Okay. So I understand from your question there are two things, right? The first one is the type of recipient. So I'm going to show you a table. It's going to be very small, right? So give me a moment. And it's hard to here. Okay, here. So these are the list. This is from one of my chapter 7. One of the list of the tables that are primary and secondary. But I want to take note, this table is highly misleading because it implies that once you are a secondary recipient, you're always a second. That's not the nature of my data. The nature of my data is country year, so it's not country, right? So if you convert this to country year data, it means that for a certain year, like Zimbabwe, for this year is a secondary recipient. For certain years, might be a primary recipient. So it's actually country year data, and it's backward facing because you have to collect the data, and the data will be outdated a few years. So this is backward data. Now, if you work for, I don't know, USAID or whatever, you work for one of the national aid agency, you will have access to privileged data. That means the data with only the US government has. If you have more sophisticated data, then you can make this a forward-looking data, right? But that means you are using with data set that is not publicly available. And because I'm a poor scholar, all I can do is publicly available data, which is always several years backwards, right? What can I do, right? So yeah. So that's the first point, right? So it depends on I did cover this, but this is backward-looking data, right? Because it's publicly available. Now, your second point is about Rwanda and all this. Now, I just want to be clear, right? The data is talking about the impact of aid on democratization. So let me just show you this. Let me just go back to one of these slides. Right? Here. Okay, is this point, which I didn't go through because it's an interest of time. My point here is this. I am not explaining democratization in the aid recipient. Many countries have many reasons why they democratize, and most of the biggest reason is domestic politics. All my model is doing is to explain the role of foreign aid as a potential cause of the liberalization, controlling for all the idiosyncratic random variation that is unique to each country. So my teaching example is this. The example of smoking and cancer, right? Genetics is the biggest cause of cancer. But I'm controlling for genetics and trying to say what happens is the role of smoking causing for cancer, controlling for genetics. That's the way to think about it. The domestic variables obviously is the biggest driver of democratization, but I'm controlling for all of this ideally with the country fixed effects. Yeah.
Since I'll give you 3 more minutes. Okay. Please be quick with your comments or questions.
Okay. Now this is I'm going to be like provocative question.
Sure.
Taking advantage of your work with this time limited study. What is your educated, let's say, opinion or comment on what is going to happen or what is happening right now? In the previous panel, we superficially mentioned that the amount of donor money is in retreat.
Yeah.
And I think just today in the Netherlands, like the big names, the big donors, Netherlands, they just announced they're going to increase 5% GDP spending on the defense and military. And as you say, aid does not reach not even 1% of the GDP of these big donors. And thanks to my French GPT, it showed me the table of all the reduction in the big donors. So, do you think that your theory, your model will apply also, given the geopolitical shift back to, let's say, this anarchical self-preservation model that we're living through, or
Sure.
what do you think?
So it's a gigantic question, but first point is that during the last week when I was at the European Association Taiwan Studies, I was presenting a paper on foreign aid, and I was basically evaluating the impact of Trump cuts on foreign aid. So okay, I'm just going to summarize. Based on that paper, and I had some data, it was about a 38% cut, not what Marco Rubio was saying was 83, right? So it's 38% cut across the board. But what I care was democracy aid. So for democracy aid, it was about 94.5% cut. So it's almost everything. Right? So yeah. So the short version is, obviously it's going to be harder because the money is going to be a lot less. But the logic didn't change, right? Because I have never assumed a world where the donors here. This is my foundational assumption. I have never assumed that the donors care about democratization more than anything else. It's always democratization as a secondary impact. So now that you have less money, the logic didn't change. It's just less money, right? That, in other words, I still argue my theory can still work in the given world because I didn't assume a golden age of democracy promotion. And by the way, the golden age title is literally chapter 7, where I talk about what was the assumption about the donors. I never assumed the donors are truly altruistic. I assume they are selfish. And I'm saying, yes, they are selfish. What can we do about it? Right? Yeah. If you want the European Studies EATS paper, I submitted it for the Taiwan Journal of Democracy. So hopefully it's published. I don't know, but it's submitted, right? But you can email me. I'm happy to just send a copy. Yeah.
Okay, we have the last two. They promise you to be very, very short.
Yeah.
You can still catch Professor after this panel. So I'm sorry to this
All right, thank you very much. My name is Precious and I'm from Zambia. First of all, this was a very insightful presentation as we have been learning a lot about donor funding and all the good stuff. So my question is, in your research, how do conditions attached to aid, such as governance reforms or economic liberalization, impact local ownership of development initiatives? And I say this because, for instance, in most African countries, donor-driven structural adjustment programs lead to cuts in public spending, which weakens health and education systems because obviously these resources are redirected to other institutions which I do not think are irrelevant, but might not be of like utmost priority. And so how can we balance donor accountability with the need for locally driven solutions?
Okay. Can I quickly answer? Yeah, okay. So you're asking about this issue of country ownership, right? Which is related to the literature about the modality of aid. How do you give aid, like through the donors or through the countries and so on? Now, this book is silent about it. It doesn't actually talk about the modality. So I know of other scholars who do research on what do you call it, aid modality. I think the name is Simone Dietrich, right? I think she has transitioned from foreign aid because now the aid industry has collapsed. Right? But her previous work, she talks about country ownership, and she also talks about aid modality. She argues that the aid modality does affect the effectiveness of aid. But generally speaking, their dependent variable is economic development. That means, does it make the country more wealthy or not? Which is the different logic from mine. I'm talking about the outcome variable is democratization. And I didn't present to you, but there's another theory called selectorate theory associated with Bruce Bueno de Mascuta in New York University. Under the selectorate theory, Western donors have almost no interest in democracy promotion. They usually want autocracy. Think about US foreign aid to Iraq and Afghanistan. All they want is a superficial semblance of democracy, but what they really want is a country that is compliant to the United States, which doesn't need democracy. In fact, having democracy makes it harder. There's a theory that just explains this. That is to say, what you see as hypocrisy from the perspective of some political science theory is just pure rational choice. It's what a rational actor would do. Yeah. That's why I don't use the hypocrisy argument, because it's beside the point.
Yeah. You talked about that the outcome variable is democratization. Yeah. So I want to ask that what claim does the study make about this outcome variable prior to the donation? And whatever claim it is making, what statistical backing is it provide to prove this claim? And this is a follow-up question on what Tawheed also asked, that how do we have this exogenous effect?
I think the book doesn't make a claim on whether the country was already, except for the part about reverse causality. That means I measure 5 years before the commitment of aid, whether the country was already liberalizing. And I basically focus on those countries that were not already liberalizing as a control to test for reverse causality. So that's the only claim I make. Other than that, I don't. Now, if your complaint is whether I have run experimental studies, then no, this book doesn't have any experimental evidence. It's purely observational, right? So country fixed effects and so on. Yeah.
Okay, let's give a round of Okay, so that concludes the book presentation of Professor Tan, and I will invite everyone to the barbecue. That's it. Have a great rest of the afternoon, and yeah, thank you, Professor.